Pearce, Chair of the committee, and to my right is Councillor Martin, who is Vice Chair. First, we'll just go through a few housekeeping matters. Fire drill. We're not expecting a drill this afternoon, so if the alarm goes, it's a real thing. And just make your way out through reception into King Square. The mobile phones instruction comes in a moment. Toilets.
It was just ready.
Yeah. Toilets are in reception should anybody need them. And there is water available on the table there to your right. Please feel free to help yourself if you need any. So this is a hybrid meeting, and that means that the committee members are present in Bridgewater House, but the meeting is also available online via Teams. And please note that the meeting is being recorded. Can I remind all those in the room to please turn off your mobile phones, put them to off or to silent, and can those joining us online please turn off your camera and microphones so that the meeting isn't disturbed. So I'll now introduce those taking part in the committee today. To my left are officers from our legal and democratic teams, and to my right are the planning officers who will present the applications. And on the wings of the table are the councillors who will debate and decide the applications. The format will be as per the published agenda, and a copy of the officer reports can be found on the council website. Each application will be taken in turn. Officers will outline each application, followed by public speaking time. Only members of the public who have registered to speak can make representation. Councillors around the table will then debate and decide on each application. During the debate, there will be a proposer and a seconder for a resolution. Members will vote on the proposal. Only members who have been present throughout the application will be able to vote. And the voting options are for, against, abstain or defer. Votes will be counted and the results announced. So we'll now go into the main agenda, and we start with apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chairman. We have no apologies.
Thank you. Yes, a full house today. Minutes from the previous meeting, are they agreed as a correct record? Thank you. Can I have a proposer? Councillor Filmer.
Yeah, happy to propose that with just one thing to draw to attention. On page 19, item 61, it says Councillor Henry, and it should be Councillor Henry.
Ah.
Happy to propose that.
Thank you. And that's Councillor Filmer has proposed. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Grimes. Thank you. All in favour? Thank you. Now declarations of interest. Ms. Lynn, can you take us through the requirements for declarations of interest, please?
Firstly, is there any members with any declarations of interest, please? No. Bob Filmer?
I've got a couple if I can. I'm a member of the drainage board, so any of the applications that are having comments from the IDB, I've not been involved in any of the discussions at the drainage board. And on the application on page 83, I am predetermined. I have made comments on the application and I'm speaking as a ward councillor today.
Thank you. Councillor Grimes?
Thank you. Yes, the application on page 83, it's in my division, but I've taken no part in any discussions on it. Thank you.
Councillor Hendry?
Speak into the microphone because it's not working.
Button on the side?
That's on the right.
That's on.
Anyway, okay.
Now press the button there.
We can go up. Oh, thank you. Same as Councillor Filmer, on the IDB as well.
Same as Councillor Filmer.
Okay, it's on. Yeah, same as Councillor Film, I'm on the IDB, but I haven't spoken to anybody about anything. Absolutely no discussions. Thank you.
Councillor Bradford.
Member of the Parrot Drainage Board.
Thank you.
Madam Chairman.
Councillor Bruce.
Yeah, member of the Parrot Drainage Board as well. Haven't taken part in any discussions. Thank you.
And Councillor Smedley.
Not working.
Press the button on the side.
Eh?
The button on the side that says on, that certain name should be on.
Okay, so as I'm advised that as a member of Bridgewater Town Council, I should declare an interest, although it's not in Bridgewater Town Council area, it's a neighbouring area. I'm not on the Bridgewater Town Council Planning Committee. I've not taken any part in this item either.
Thank you. Councillor Close.
Thank you. Yeah, same as councillor Smedley for the application on page 23 for the land between Bristol Road and Bath Road. Other registrable interest as a member of Bridgewater Town Council, that's neighbouring council and consultee, but I haven't taken part in any discussion.
Thank you. So for the members of the public, you've heard that, oh, sorry. I'm so sorry, councillor Slade.
It's not my fault, no, because I was dithering. I'm also a member of the town council, but I'm not on planning, not taking any discussions, anything at all, just wanted to let you know.
Thank you. So for the purpose of the gallery, you've heard members declare that they're on the internal drainage board or they're a member of the town or parish council. They're dual-hatted members. Because some of these applications will go to these bodies for consultation, the members are saying that they haven't been involved in any consultation stage, so they're coming to the decision-making body today when they hear the applications with an open mind before they make their decision. And then you've heard that one member has declared that he is predetermined. Where a member is predetermined or biased on any application before the committee, they will, unless registered to speak, subsequently leave the room and take no part in that application. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. So we now go to agenda item 4, which is public question time. There are members of the public who have registered to speak on the applications, and I'll call you up to the table in front before when each application has been presented. So that takes us straight into agenda item 5 on page 23 of the agenda, and that is the application for land off A38 Bristol Road and Bath Road. Mr. Ning, can you present the application for us, please?
Thank you. This application, I've sort of simplified the description of development to bring it in line to the way the applicant has referred to it in their application form, but it's essentially, it's a parcel of land in their numbering, parcel 5. It's the land at Sydenham Farm that is on the east side of the North East Bridgewater residential development. The application has been amended. It came in as a higher number, but it's been reduced to 90 dwellings with an area of local play, so a small area, but the smallest level of equipment to facilitate play as opposed to a more formalised area of play, and then the associating vehicle connection works through the adjoining residential area, and then the various elements of the ancillary parts of the development, including car parking and associated infrastructure and connections. So there is the North East Bridgewater site. You can see the motorway curving north to south next to the site outlined in yellow. You then have the adjoining residential area that's built out at the northern end, and there's a parcel of land, you can see in sort of grey, the browny colour there, that was being built out, is still being built out when Google Earth flew over. You can see at the northern end there, sort of the Morrison's distribution centre, that was part of the original outline, and the outline included essentially the whole of the triangle you can see with the bottom corner just off the bottom of the map there. I've got a slide that will show the original allocation there, but we're dealing with just this one area here. There it is in closer detail. You can see the buildings, the old farm buildings. Most of those have now been demolished. All the large traditional, well, the large farm buildings have been demolished. What remains is the farmhouse and some outbuildings. The farmhouse is actually in the adjoining development site, and this application doesn't get to grips with the loss of that. That's been dealt with on another side. So this, I've got detailed photographs of the outbuildings at the back of the farmhouse, or what are demolished as a result of this application. So it includes up to about here, so this area of green space, and then down to the bottom corner here, is all within the application site. So there is the master plan from the outline application that was approved back in, I think, about 2009. On the left-hand side, there is the full extent of it with the yellow areas showing the residential. The employment is the pink area here, pink and purple, and then the large area here, that's where the Morrison site is. And that was approved as part of the original outline, which I think was a hybrid application. There were elements approved in detail and elements approved in outline. On the left-hand side of the slide, you can just about see underneath the outline of the site there is an area of employment land. It was referred to at the time as in employment zone 4. So that had outline planning permission for employment development. So we were always anticipating this site to be developed probably as sort of your larger buildings for employment uses. You can see just down at the southern end, underneath the red line, there was an element in there of residential as well. So this application seeks to essentially replace that employment element with residential development. So for the purposes of the application, the red line around the site, the developer is also doing the parcel of land next door, edged in blue just to the west. Just really from the highways records here, just showing the extent of adopted highway. I show this slide really just to sort of make the point here that the adoption of the residential areas that have been built out is an ongoing work. It is never quick on these things, with all the ironing out of the wrinkles through various highway legal agreements. But those, I'm told that those are in the process of adoption, such that they will link through to this site. And the highways officer is advising that it's envisaged that this site would be adopted as part of normal post-construction adoption agreements. So there is the overall plan for the site. I've got a couple of, I zoom in on this in the next couple of slides, but along the motorway barrier running north to south there, that is a sort of a landscaped area within which would be the acoustic protection measures for this site, which would comprise a bund with an acoustic fence on top of it to a height overall of 5 meters. And then there is some scope for landscaping around that. The suggestion in the recommendation is that the technical detail of that bund to ensure that it works is agreed by condition, and then the maintenance of it thereafter is set in the Section 106 agreement to ensure that we have a maintenance regime that will keep it in good order and replace it if it eventually needs replacing, and also hopefully to deal with the visual condition of it over the years. So zooming in on that in more detail, top part, we have you can see just on the adjoining site, there's a little row of properties here. The idea of this, of much negotiation, was to create a frontage looking north, extending from that building just to the west, so that we create a sort of a frontage looking north onto the former Willowman site. We then have basically in this part of the development, we have 2 streets, sort of essentially back to back. We have, after negotiation, got the properties on the west side to face onto the existing road to create a street there. And we have done our best to get a alignment with the adjoining roads in the already built out development. It's not perfectly lined up, but it will provide for pedestrian connectivity through from this site to that site. And you can see the parking is arranged. It's essentially all off-road, no on-street parking. So some plots have parking next to them along the periphery edges. And then these ones that front out onto the existing street have their parking to the rear. And this creates a sort of open area such that we've not got sort of dark and dingy, hidden away parking areas. They are all overlooked by the properties we park there, as well as having gaps between the buildings so that there are views into and out of those parking areas. Just all buildings 2-story. I do have a plan showing story height, but these 2 here are the entrance to the site are the only ones that are higher than that. They're 2.5-story, so rooms in the roof. Those 2 just at the entrance to the site here. Then just coming down, just to fix you, there's those 2 we just looked at. We have a little area of play, nicely centrally located in the development. Obviously, to the north, there is the open area where residents would have access to around the Willow Man, and there's another area we get to down the bottom that is reasonably well connected on the adjoining site. So this part, we've just got a single street. And then coming down to the bottom, this way you do get this little bit of development in behind, but you have the adjoining development here. And yeah, we've tried to create a sort of continuation of the building form from the adjoining site into this site, a house here that fronts onto, and then there is a play area here on the adjoining site, which would be available for residents of this part of the site. So we feel everyone is, all future residents would have good access to play areas as we expect through our policies. And then you can see here, just the dotted, the line, the slightly lighter line there is the line of the acoustic fence, which comes all the way down to the bottom. Just really give you those, confirm those story heights, two at the entrance will be the two higher ones in the roof. So very much within the development, they're not going to form a high frontage on the edge of the development. Just really, very, apologies for the scale of it, but all just the intent of this drawing is to show that within the back garden areas, we have these little areas that are earmarked for bin and cycle stores. So each house would have within its garden refuge and cycle storage areas. Just rolling that through, you can see here, they're sort of to the rear of the houses. They've all got sort of access to those around the backs of the houses. So these ones in mid-terrace have access along the back. Adjoining property. So everyone has rear access to get to those stores. That's continued down to the bottom of the side. This one here just is to indicate just the acoustic measures. We've got the main acoustic fence to 5 meters in height, is the yellow line all the way along here. At the top, just to protect the area at the top here, there is a fence here of about 3 meters in height, and a similar higher fence just at the bottom here, so that the noise doesn't spill round the houses into their gardens. And we're suggesting fairly detailed conditions to secure a certain noise level in all the habitable rooms. I think that's condition 13. And there's also measuring that to try and secure as appropriate noise levels in the garden areas. And that's what those little fences at the top will aim to influence. So just there you go, there's the detail there. So it's a 2.5 meter fence just around here, so that the noise doesn't spill in around the back. Over here, the garage will serve that function between here. Then you have the line of the acoustic fence here. We will secure the full detail of that. I've got an indicative slide in a minute, but we secure the full detail through the charge condition. And then at the bottom, just again to protect noise spill into the back garden areas, a couple more. Specifically an acoustic fence at 1.8 meters. And there is the indicative drawing of how the acoustic bund and fence would work along the motorway edge of the site. So you would, there is the motorway. The motorway is on a slightly higher level than existing ground levels. Existing ground levels would be brought up a bit on site because of the need to get finished floor levels up to a flood safe level as specified by the Environment Agency. So it wouldn't be far off the motorway levels. And then there would be a raised bund with the opportunity for landscaping, and then the fence on top of the bund. That would then leave those quite, I've got a photograph coming, there's very deep green alongside the motorway, but there is maintenance of that, which the IDB have been anxious to secure. Some artistic impressions of how the development would work. So the top one is looking at there's the block of houses on the adjoining site that these two would then, and the two detached houses on the northern side of the site would then line up with. I've got a photograph in the bottom corner there. You can see those two houses, these two here in the artistic impression, and then the houses would sort of run off from that. And then on the adjoining site, there is a sort of a larger, more modern in its design block of flats. Second one there, just looking here within this would be the view from the adjoining site of that sort of terrace that would front onto the existing road. The house types are very much of the type that have been approved up here. It's the same developer doing the adjoining site. These are house types you can see if you drive around this area, the North East Bridgewater, this part of the North East Bridgewater development. And then just looking, there's facing an area of the bund, just the entrance, near one of the entrances. So these are this little road looking out, facing towards the motorway, so they were looking towards the landscaped bund. And again, it's a similar house type, as we saw in the previous drawing with the sort of detached house types on the end. And then we see the same house types. This is the very bottom end of the site, so I think possibly I do need to sort of say that the trees are probably a little more artistic than the drawings of the houses. And then really just a canter through the house types. There are a number of them, brick tiled roofs with sort of Portland stone type window surrounds here. Variations of very similar house types that would be around the site. And then you've got the odd sort of corner plot one, taking the same design themes, but sort of, we'll use that being forming a corner plot. And then a sort of variation for detached house type, brick with render over, again, tiled roof. Slightly different detached house type. A variation on that same house type, then a sort of red one. So these are the two at the side entrance with the rooms and the roof. So essentially 2-story, but with some additional rooms. But with modern construction technique, it is higher than a house that's had its loft converted. Then sort of the final couple of house types. Again, very similar design themes. And then there's very few garages, but that's an example. The 2 detached houses on facing north, they would have a garage of this type between them. That would help with sort of acoustic methods. And then we have the little lab, very sort of, for the smallest children, the intent of these sort of local areas of play, so that smallest children can play within sight and sound of home. The rest of us would have good access. Detail of that equipment. I think that's suggested that could be done by condition. So starting at the top of the site, looking, the Willow Man's just behind me as I take this. There's the existing play area. There's that block of flats we saw in previous drawing. And then we're sort of looking straight down the site, motorway on the left. So development would come up to sort of follow the line of this and the block here. There is that ring. As you see, it's a deep one. And the bund would be probably on the line of that road there that's left over from previous activities on the site. It can be maintained from the left-hand side. And that's the IDB and National Highways England are very anxious that is maintained. Just stood over on the left-hand side of the site, looking south again. So there's the existing houses. We get down to the bottom of the site. There's quite a lot going on that because they're using the southern end of the site as a construction compound. The houses they're building just to the west. So there you can see sort of, digged over in this area here. These are the house types that they're going to bring forward onto this site. So those are sort of existing houses done by another developer, but very similar materials, general theme. There's that. So the northern end of the site will be coming off this gable end and across here. So the top half of this, top third of this green area is retained. And then looking up to what remains of the Willow Man, with Morrison's in the background. And there, looking down the site, so you can see really the top end of the development will be about here. The green area, I'm still on taking the photograph. Just to give you an idea of the relationship to motorway, as you can see, it's on a slightly higher level now. This ground level does come up, so it won't be as marked the difference between levels. But the sites, all the noise assessment has been done at all levels that are proposed. But really just so that we are fully aware of there is a motorway. Just panning around for the sound. And then This is just at that site office at the bottom of the site, just looking south, the site ends just at the end of this compound area. Fence there. And that's all open area, the plans we're looking at. And then looking north from that site office. So you can see just here, there is the original farmhouse with its buildings behind. Next photo just zooms in on that. So you have a sort of traditional stone farmhouse with a range of outbuildings. I think they were stables. And then just looking along the motorway, that road disappears as part of this application. The fund is potentially lined up. And then just looking at the existing buildings again, there's the outbuildings at the back. Those are the ones that are part of this application. The house at the front has already been agreed for removal by a previous grant of permission. But just to give you an idea of what it is, so this site is stood on a site that's already got planning permission, the blue edge line on the location plan. As you can see, that the work is well underway. That part of the site. There you go. You can see that various slabs are already in. And just looking across the site, back down to the site construction areas, the bottom end of the site, down the far end there. So in terms of the key issues for this application, the principle, the site has already been approved for development, albeit with predominantly employment land. As set out in the report, I think there has been a reasonable justification put in for the loss of that employment land. It reflects arguments that have been made on adjoining sites. We go back, if we can picture the original layout I showed of the North East Bridgewater development, a couple of those employment sites have already gone over to residential development. We've accepted the argument that employment demands on employment or employment space have changed. There is accepted that there is a good supply of alternatives in the town, and this site, given where it is, that would only ever be accessed through residential development, was probably an aspiration at the time. It's not needed by the market anymore, and is probably not ideally sited next to residential area. So from that point of view, we have accepted the argument about the loss of the employment. In terms of the highways, the access would be through the existing residential development. That is, albeit not adopted yet, is in the process of being adopted. It's still being built out that part of the development. There are no highways concerns in terms of how that would work or the wider impacts of the increase of traffic that this site might generate, given that it was originally envisaged that it would generate a certain amount from employment use and a certain amount from that little element of residential. So any increase in traffic is probably marginal as to be not objectionable. Internally, the layout is accepted as being accessible to sort of the typical bin lorries and delivery vehicles, as well as residential traffic that would access it, and the parking meets our standards. In terms of the living conditions, there's no conflict with the future living conditions of the adjoining residents. We've achieved appropriate separation distances. The closest bit is where people face each other across the road, which is entirely, it's not unusual that houses on the opposite side of the streets, they coexist perfectly happily. In terms of future residents of this development, that bund and the fencing is critical. We need that to be agreed because this close to the motorway, this development would be unacceptable without that. We accept that bund will work. A lot of work has gone into that, and I have visited other sites with similar bunds. They do work. They're astonishingly, in fact. But we need to secure that in perpetuity. We also need fabric of the buildings when they're built to ensure that any residual noise, the bund isn't going to cure all the noise problems, but with appropriate measures of construction and insulation, glazing, etc., those houses would have appropriate noise levels. We're suggesting a belt and braces, therefore, of bund and fence, plus the fabric of the building to be agreed by condition. And then I'm also suggesting a condition which is a bone of contention with the applicant. But I think it's condition 14 that we're suggesting that verification reports are provided for the dwellings prior to occupation to ensure that the measures that have been put forward and agreed by condition have actually worked. So subject to that, we think the living conditions are acceptable and will meet our policy requirements at D25. In terms of visual impact, the design is following the house types that have been approved on the adjoining sites. There's nothing startling there. Will be seen in the context of the wider North East Bridgewater site and are considered a flood location. There are a number of other technical issues related to the usual ecology issues that we are trying to secure benefit from, drainage and flood risk, etc., which we feel can be conditioned. And there are a range of conditions set out in my report. The applicant has raised a number of minor drafting issues with the conditions. I think none of those fundamentally alter the conditions. I would suggest, I mean, I can elaborate if members so wanted, but I'm suggesting that those minor changes are within the scope of what could be agreed between the chair and vice chair and officers in the event that the recommendation is accepted. I can elaborate on those if anyone would need me to, but the recommendation subject is to approve subject to the Section 106 agreement as set out in the report and the conditions thereafter. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. New. I'm sure that we would like some clarification on those minor changes,
Yeah.
but if I take the speakers first and then we will take questions after that, that's okay. So we have two speakers on this item, and the first one is Mr. Holton, who is speaking against. Mr. Holton, would you like to come up to the table, please? And let us know when you're ready to start, and you'll have 3 minutes on the clock.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me well.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So I've lived in the area now for about 8 years, and even in that time, I've seen, especially that area, expand quite rapidly. Even a search on Google Earth will show you from 2012 the rapid expansion out, and it is mainly housing. Granted, it may be needed, but some of my main concerns are that they just continue to build on what is left of the available green space. Even just taking a drive around the area, you will already see preparations coming off the road for all the other areas, which has already been alluded to on the diagrams. I think that makes it more difficult for people just to be able to get out for mental well-being, exercise and activities. It means that they've got to travel further. I have to disagree with the traffic within the area. I have seen that increase markedly as well. The parking is poor at best, even for the already available housing. Just to get cars on the driveway is quite difficult. And because of that, there's cars and vans parked on the roadsides quite frequently up to and opposite junctions as well. This does make it difficult to get in and out on the main roads. I've even had to reverse out onto the main roads before. So the main concern there is if anything bigger needs to get down, especially in an emergency, that's going to be quite difficult. Your poor availability of and frequency of public transport, maybe that would get addressed in the future. However, there isn't that public transport that comes out to that area, maybe one bus on the hour, which again means that that's going to be more people that are going to be driving around, increase in traffic. I've seen it being used as rat runs more frequently, people going from one side of Bridgewater to the other, and observed frequently speeding vehicles, which again I know has been brought out or has been made aware of, can be looked into. But there is a school down that area as well, which is another concern. And then generally just the poor state of the roads currently. Some of the roads are in poor condition. The main arteries in and out of Bridgewater, again, I've seen them become more and more congested over the previous years, and that does make a delay getting in and out, especially Bridgewater. And for anybody that goes shopping in the local area, you'll know how bad it can be just to get out of the supermarket car parks because of the poor road designs there as well. Introducing more traffic is only going to activate that.
Well timed, thank you. We'll address the questions that you've raised after the next speaker. Can I ask Mr. Freer to come up to the table, please? You have 3 minutes, and let us know when you're ready, and we'll start the timer.
Yes, fine, sorry, that's that, yes. Thank you, councillors, and for the opportunity to speak. I'm the agent, work for David Locke Associates on behalf of the applicants Hallam and Persimmon Homes. The proposals are set out clearly in the committee report and in a summary leaflet that I hope you didn't mind the applicant sending to you, really as a aid memoir of the proposals more than anything else. These proposals, as the officer has helpfully explained, concern the northern half of the North East Bridgewater mixed-use development, which is now known as Kingsdown. They're the 5th and final phase of this northern part of the development, and were designed, as you can see on the drawing above, on a comprehensive basis with phase 4, which is in grey, as part of this final phase of the northern part. This site is really the final piece of the jigsaw of that part of the site. The wider development itself has delivered large-scale employment, local centre and retail facilities recently, the Willow Down Primary School, sports pitches, pavilion and open space. And these latest proposals will benefit from such infrastructure, including the drainage infrastructure and the highway infrastructure that is already being constructed. That infrastructure is there. Further, the proposals will add to community and physical infrastructure through SIL contributions, the local area for pay, local construction employment opportunities, ecological enhancements. There's a long list of organisations that have no objections to the proposals: National Highways, Somerset Highways, the Environment Agency, LLFA, Natural England, Somerset Ecology Services, nor any policy objections. The Affordable Housing Officer welcomes the additional 27 additional affordable units. In the local plan, the site is clearly shown as land committed for development, employment and residential, as you've heard, and the land was granted consent, that part south of the Willowman for employment development in the previous approvals. This application was lodged in 2021, since when we've had very productive discussions with officers and other stakeholders, and the proposals have been refined to reflect those, reducing the numbers to 90. As a result, the officer's report has concluded that all the comments, the references appear to be that all the comments have taken on board and appropriate changes made. We've been pleased to work with officers, we'll be pleased to work with stakeholders going forward, securing technical matters like land drainage consent, and this will allow the seamless progression of phase 4 into phase 5, minimising inconvenience going forward. We support the heads of terms that are set out in the report, and on the matter of conditions, I should confirm that the applicants, the concerns are primarily drafting and process, they're not of principle, including in relation to verification as mentioned. So we hope, the applicants hope very much that the committee will be keen to support the recommendation. Thanks for the time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Mr. Noon, if you could just give a little bit more detail on the minor changes that have been mentioned, and also issues raised by the speaker around the loss of green space, increasing traffic rat runs and speeding, parking difficulties, and poor availability of public transport, and the state of the existing roads, please.
Thank you. If I could probably go through those points raised by the speaker first. I mean, obviously, the loss of this green space is going to be witnessed. I mean, it isn't green at the moment, but it was approved for development. So we're not losing any green space that wasn't already going to be lost of the original approval here. Now, I appreciate that local residents have got used to this area being available for dog walking and other forms of recreation. However, we've already approved it for development, and I don't see that there's any reasonable justification to take that matter of principle away from this development. That much said, there's an element to the north, it's diminished, but it's not all of this green area that goes. it is limited to the extent of what had previously been agreed. In terms of traffic, that previous approval would have assumed a certain level of traffic to be generated by the number of houses approved at the bottom, probably not many, 20-ish maybe. Plus the employment land, which, you know, you can, my highways colleagues could tell me how much, you know, based on floor space, what sort of traffic movement they can expect from that. It's probably in total less than what we're looking at from 90 dwellings, but not a lot less. And on that basis, you know, is it, you know, would that modest increase that 90 dwellings would create, as opposed to what was approved through that existing residential network of roads, is that unacceptable? The highways advice is not that it doesn't create any significant increase in traffic that is objectionable in this instance. I accept what the gentleman said about difficult parking. That development is of its time. I suspect its parking is laid out in such a way that we may have second thoughts about if we were presenting it with it now as a current application. But that is existing development. We can't take away those residents' right to park on the road and without traffic regulation order to introduce parking restrictions. The highways officer would have been aware of that. I think the simple point here, I think, is that badly parked cars on another site, very difficult for that to form basis of a refusal of planning permission on this site. In terms of the parking that is provided now, the layout of that, we have very few garages. Now, garages do have a tendency to have stuff collected in them and not be available for parking of vehicles. Now, they are very few in number here. So these parking spaces would always be available. They wouldn't be used for anything else. And I think that is a positive. Yes, there are tandem spaces, and I do appreciate that some residents may not use the inside one, because they fear getting trapped in. That's human behaviour. This is an acceptable level of parking and layout in terms of our parking standards. So the fear that people won't use them and will choose to park on the road I don't think is one that we could substantiate as a concern or an objection to this application. Although I do hear what the gentleman is saying on that point. Public transport I believe that it does run up King's Drive. It is available. It is a level of parking of public transport that is probably reflective of this sort of suburban or edge of Bridgwater location. This development will provide more potential customers for that bus service, and you do need more customers to make a bus service viable. I don't think it's not reasonable to expect a bus service to run into this development. I don't think it's ever been laid out or intended that would be the case, but there is a bus service that runs along King's Drive, and that would be available for residents. And if more people use it, it might run more frequently. But I don't think we can sort of lay that at this developer's door in terms of expecting some sort of contribution to improving that bus service. In terms of other alternatives, there are cycle and pedestrian routes through this development as part of the wider original approval. They are in place and they are available. So there would be alternatives to the private motor car. But we do accept that in this sort of outer fringe of Bridgwater, the car ownership, what the gentleman said, it would appear to be a fact of life. We are trying to manage that as best we can with this layout and the level of parking. In terms of rat running, I think that's probably a wider issue. I don't think there's going to be any rat running through this development. It doesn't lead to anywhere. It's at the far end of a cul-de-sac. Whether King's Drive is being used in the way it was originally envisaged, I don't know. But that will be a matter to be picked up in a wider picture discussion about transport in Bridgwater as a whole. That's the points I have noted down on that. Just to go to the conditions, just give you a flavour of the issues that have been raised. There's a few grammatical corrections and
Um,
suggested.
Mr. New, before you move on, there was the state of the existing road, and I think you alluded to that in your presentation, but if you'd like to talk us through that again, please.
Yes, I suspect, going back to that drawing, that where the roads within the residential areas have not yet been adopted, I suspect they may be in a bit of a rough pre-post construction stage. That is a matter that is resolved through the adoption process, the Section 38 agreement with our highways colleagues. On these big residential developments where the construction is ongoing, unfortunately, that does take time because the highway officers are reluctant to adopt roads where there is still significant construction traffic passing over it. We are where we are with that. Specific examples of Braes where there appears to be no reason why something hasn't been adopted, that can be raised with us and we can pass it on and push our highways colleagues to try and explain what's going on there. Just going to the conditions. So condition 4, for example, it doesn't need the front piece with the exception of demolition or with the exception of development, site clearance and preparation. We don't need that bit because it's a prior to occupation. So that's a drafting error on my part. So condition 4, I'd be suggesting that the first clause of the first sentence is deleted because it doesn't need to be there because it's a pre-occupation, not pre-commencement condition. Pointing that out. Condition 7 has a condition 7 is just an error there in that there's a rogue 2 in it somewhere. So a grammatical ironing out of condition 7. Condition 16 similarly has an extra and in it. The importation and of soil, it said we also need to delete that and. So a couple of grammatical tidies up of those of conditions 4, 7 and 16. 19 is just bring that up. Past it. So what they're suggesting is condition 19 probably needs elaboration of the guidance note that we're referring to. In this area. So looking to see exactly what that point is. Apologies, I lost all connectivity this morning and haven't been able to iron that out. So I think condition 19 is grammatic and tidying up in the first part.
Confirmation step 4 and step 5 expanded. There's just clarification of the requirements of the condition.
Yeah, so the condition is trying to be maybe a little over prescriptive in saying these details must comply with this with these specifications. Obviously, if they're unacceptable, we decline to discharge the condition anyway. So I think grammatically, just tidying up that so that it makes sense in relation to documents we're referring to. And then condition 23 is just suggesting that it would be better worded. No dwelling hereby approved should be occupied unless details of the layout and equipment of the local areas of play have been submitted to and agreed in writing by the local planning authority. Agreed in writing. So I missed off by the local planning authority when I drafted that condition. So insert that is to be agreed by the local planning authority. It's good practice. Just to say who has to agree it in writing, but it's implied by the fact it's a planning condition. So apologies for that. And then condition 11 on the travel plan is suggested that we delete the last sentence for that. But I think that will probably be at odds with what my travel plan officer is advising. In that, I think we do want the travel plan what's agreed to be for the duration of the occupation of the development. Because, you know, we would want people, you know, this information to be available to all residents of the development now and in the future in terms of travel planning. I think, however, just looking at the way we're drafting that, I think because we've got a timetable, if we change that condition just to say that the submitted details shall include a timetable for the implementation and a duration of that implementation, we can agree that with my travel plan officer without sort of deleting the ongoing requirement right now. So I think that's a reasonable suggestion. But we'll agree that the duration of travel plan for the discharge of condition. That's the end of the list there. Condition 14, there is a difference of agreement, but I'm not inclined to suggest to you today that we change that. But it may come up in debate.
Thank you, Mr. Noon. Members, are there any questions before we move into debates? Any questions for Mr. Noon? Councillor Slocum.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a clarification, I didn't quite understand, my apologies. On the condition 13, can you just elaborate what exactly that means? Do this house sizes meet the minimum space standards? And could you just clarify for me what size the gardens are, the actual garden to the house? Because I noticed it says 7 to 23 at the top, then 23 back to 7. I'm so sorry, I didn't understand that.
Right. So condition 13 is my environmental health officer suggested noise limits, they're not size limits. So what we're saying here is in those rooms between the hours of 7 AM and 11 at night, those noise levels are reached. Now those are LAEQ 16 hours. I mean, that's an averaged over 16 hours. So we're not specifying noise limits for living rooms and dining rooms at night, simply because people tend to move into bedrooms. So that's why we have a lower 30 decibel limit over an 8-hour average at night times in bedrooms. But they also need to manage sort of noise events of more than 45 decibels. For example, I mean, you know, if you had a particularly noisy vehicle go by, so they need to be able to contain the noises, the noisier ones of those. So those are the internal noise limits. And then in the garden areas, again, daytime hours only. Nighttime, it will be quieter anyway. The motorway's quieter, but during the daytime hours of 7 till 11, 55. Again, 55 decibels, again, over that 16-hour average. So that's fairly well-trodden noise metrics that my environmental health officer is very familiar with. She recommends these on all these developments up and down the motorway. Now, we think that can be, well, you know, elsewhere we've agreed, there's no evidence to show that we are wrong, that an appropriate bund fence to deal with the main noise, just simply by creating a barrier, and then by the fabric of the building to deal with any noise that gets past that barrier, we will achieve those. So noise bedrooms, room sizes aren't referred to in that condition. We are satisfied that they do meet those. I haven't measured individual garden sizes. I put that slide up there. We did have quite a lot of debate with this developer over the course of the negotiation on this one to get some of what were felt to be too small gardens out of the equation. Yes, there are some that are larger than others. There are some that are quite small, but it reflects the general grain and pattern of development on the adjoining site. And we think there's a good choice of garden sizes here for future occupiers. They're not what you get in a traditional house in one of the villages, but these are a standard that we are used to seeing in this form of modern urban development, felt to be appropriate.
Councillor Hendry.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question, just a silly little question. Page 27, last two paragraphs. It keeps referring to a lap. Can you just confirm this is a lap or a leap? Because given the amount of houses there, would expect this to be an equipped area rather than just a lab. If it is equipped, then is that a misquote on there? Because given the amount of properties, you would expect a leak rather than a lab there. Thank you.
It is a lab, so it's got a very small level, low level of equipment on it. It was, in the course of discussions, it was felt that there were there is alternative leak provision in the North East Bridgewater development as a whole that would be able to accommodate the additional use from here. So there's an area up around the Willowman, there's something over, there's also some play out over near the school. And I saw open spaces officer sort of accepted, we didn't roll over on this, there was a lot to pay, that there is sufficient alternative provision so as not to be necessarily on site in this instance.
Mr. New, just so everybody's clear, and not everybody will be familiar with lap and leap. Would you like to just explain what's Brooklyn?
There we go. A lap is a local area of play. Quite often they have no formal play equipment, although it's been suggested here, in that it could have just earth moulding, it could have a few sort of flat tree stumps, logs to climb on. So basically to facilitate play. A leap is a local equipped area of play. It's larger than this, and it has more formalised play equipment. So that's a medium-sized one. And then I think at the high end, there's a NEEP. It's a neighbourhood equipped area of play. And we're not in that sort of territory. That they tend to kick in at the very large developments. This on its own, 90 dwellings would normally, that's correct, would normally trigger the need for leak provision on site, unless it is agreed that there is alternative local provision available, which is what we would read in this instance.
Thank you. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me, my question was about the lap as well, actually. To follow on from that, I mean, it's not a very big area, but it is in a good location, centrally overviewed by some houses, so there's supervision and whatnot. But I was looking at the Bund plan and the overall site plan. Now we have the lap in the centre, but that is going to cater for our very small children. I mean, how many buildings are there going to be here? There's quite a number. 90, a good number of which are going to be occupied by young parents who have young children who grow up into teenagers. And try as I might, in all my years as a teenager, I could never get them to stop playing football. And I noticed that the lap that we have here, the only other place that we have apart from the sites at the top of the Willowman or whatever, down at the south of the site, you've got a moderately sized green space, maybe 8 or 10 houses size. I can bet £1 that people are going to play football down there. What worries me is that the motorway is right next to it. I mean, I'm no athlete, but I bet I could get a ball over that hedge, right onto the motorway. Have they considered, or has it been considered, to install like a rugby-style net or something there to stop balls going over, or anything? Children will do what they do.
This is the sorry, wrong drawing there. So the Bund does extend around that area. That's 5 metres. Kickable over, I accept that.
2 metres tall.
So from that point of view, it's not formally an area of play. It's an area sort of landscaped. It was difficult to be able to fit anything in down there. This is left over, unfortunately. In the same way as, I suppose, if children chose to play football in the street, running alongside that Bund, there would be the risk of that. It's a reasonable distance the other side of the motorway. Where's that typical section there? So you've got a considerable distance from the other side of the level area, the Bund, the maintenance strip, the Reen, the motorway, Urge. There, it's not something that my play officer has identified as a risk. And I think possibly we're sort of, maybe in danger of straying into worst case scenario. If someone was determined to do something silly here, they might find a way of doing that. I don't think it is realistic to expect that. I don't think that bottom area will be attractive as a play area. It might, in terms of kicking ball games.
Well, you were a teenager. I'm assuming you were.
Remember that far back. But I think, in the same way, that area green space to the north of the development is flat level grass, just as likely to go over from there. And there's no evidence that that's been occurring from the current use of this existing area.
We would know about it if it did.
I think it would have been flagged up.
Okay, thank you.
And as Dawn points out, there is no bund along this area of open space currently. So I appreciate the concern. There's no evidence that it's a real one.
Councillor Bruce.
Just some clarification on condition 12. So the bund and the acoustic fence seems to be obviously of fundamental importance here. Is it, the way it's written, it's not clear to me whether those details have got to be agreed in writing before any work can commence. Because it then talks about then, no dwelling shall be occupied and etc. But doesn't talk about when work can commence. Does the bund need to be agreed before anything can commence?
Drafting of the condition is I think it's almost back to front in that intentionally so. The bund has to be done prior to occupation. That's the key thing. And prior to the commencement of the construction of the bund, they have to agree the details. So you cannot occupy any houses unless the bund's in place. You can't start building the bund unless the details have been agreed. It may be a drafting on my part that could have made it clearer. The intent in my mind was we don't need to be agreeing this pre-commencement of the site as a whole.
Or can I just come back on that? If the bund is considered not suitable and not feasible to serve its purpose, you then got construction already started on something that's not feasible to go ahead.
I appreciate the concern. Let me have a little think about better wording. The main thing is that bund and fence have to be in prior to occupation. That's the fundamental. The risk is with the developer. They can't get sign off on the bund. It's not agreed and they're in breach of condition. But let me just have a little think about better wording for that. Thank you.
In the meantime, there are some more questions coming in. Councillor Filmer and then Councillor Slogan.
Query about all this. I mean, it's starting with the bund. I mean, when you showed us the cross-sectional earlier, the motorway was showing quite considerably higher. We're saying the ground level is going to be raised. So when we talk about the height of the bund, are we talking about the height above the raised level? It's there. We also have in previous sites had issues with bunds because when they get built, they have a habit of sinking. So they don't remain at the height that you're putting them in to start with. The ground drops. And if we were dropping it on ground that's already been made up, that's likely to drop even more. But the motorway isn't going to drop. So how convinced are we that that bund and fence is actually big enough? Because we're only talking about 5 meters in total, which is not great when you compare it with the size of the properties that are going behind it. And if that then subsequently sinks as well, I'd like to just know how we make sure it remains at the height that it's supposed to be and doesn't drop.
I'm alive to that issue because I've got a feeling the bund might prove to be quite steep, and that creates issues for stability and also for the landscaping, because obviously a very steep, narrow bund has got potential to be very free draining, meaning the landscaping must take. That in mind, I did insert the word technical into condition 12. So the details shall demonstrate the technical and acoustic feasibility. The intent of the use of the word technical is to show that the bund is the construction of the bund works. And that's where we would capture that concern. So we can expand that if need be, if members felt there's more emphasis needed.
That problem. My concern also is you mentioned the landscaping as well, which the next point that I've got down here, which is this is the gateway to Bridgewater. This is right up on the motorway. This is what people are going to see. I must admit, I'm not overly enamoured with the design. It's not the most imaginative I understand you're telling me it's in keeping with the other stuff that's gone in there. But that doesn't necessarily, this is the gateway. And at the front of that gateway, we're going to have this fence on top of a bund. We've seen some very nice looking landscaping with big bushes and big trees up there. Again, I'm not convinced how that works, because on this particular site, which is narrow, we haven't got the width to play with, which we have on some other sites. So again, I'm just looking for that reassurance that what we're seeing there is actually deliverable, and it isn't just a picture that can't be obtained because there isn't the ground to create landscaping in that we're saying is going to be there to hide this fence.
Okay, I'm hopeful that, we can assure you that with the conditions we're suggesting. So obviously condition 12 will ensure that we get the technical feasibility of the bund, which will include sort of irrigation inside of things. That is the intent of that technical. We also have condition 24, which the landscaping proposal has to be agreed. And the third bullet point is specifically screening planting for the acoustic fence and bund. Now, I can fully understand that anyone who has driven past the Sender School recently will see what happens where it maybe isn't got right. That was very much in my mind when I have been working through this application in negotiations with the applicant. I have had my attention drawn to, and I have seen, courtesy of Google Earth, a very similar bund on the outskirts of Oxford on the A40, dual carriageway, not motorway, but and that is a steep bund with an acoustic fence on top, and the landscaping on that, I think, is fantastic. It works. You can't hide it. You can screen and mitigate it. And with imaginative planting, if you've got a very steep structure, you can sort of do the planting in tiers along the structure. You've got room on the outside for some bigger trees to provide screening. And that one, when you visit it on Google Earth, from the A40 side, you can't even see it because of the screening planting that's been done. And from the inside of the development, and it's pretty much exactly the same sort of development as this in terms of row of houses, road, bund, motorway, it's pretty much identical to that. From the inside, the planting that they came up with, I think, is very imaginative. It's still a structure that you see, but it has been softened with green planting. And on that basis, I think this can be done. It will need careful attention to detail. And I think it's not a repeat of the school bund.
Did you want to come back?
I've got a couple of other ones if I can, just to raise, just again looking for reassurance to some extent. Within this, you mentioned that this was obviously commercial land originally, and we've said that we believe that we've been persuaded that there isn't that need. Within the report, it said that we should have had things like it should have been marketed, it should have been proved that there is a need. Have we actually had proof that there is a need, or are we just assuming that because there's other things out there that we therefore don't need? I'm just looking again, wanting to avoid us setting a difficult way forward, but people can say, oh, well, if you can persuade us, that's okay, rather than actually proving to us that there is not that need anymore.
The application is supported by a sort of commercial land availability type statement, which does do a lot of work on that. We have also had the experience, and this isn't the first one we've set. We've been through on this North East Bridgewater site. We've had two other applications. I'll show you where they are. So we are reasonably well versed in assessing these, but we've got what is known as the Vistry land site, which I think was 80 houses just up in this purple triangle, and then just north of, I think there's a Tesco gone in recently, the sort of retail area, commercial, community type stuff, and then there's a scheme in there as well of, I think it's about 50. I think the Burberry factory is just on this area of purple here. So we have looked in great detail of two previous exercises in doing this. And we have compared, this one has had to jump through the same hoops as that. So we're not taking the first thing that we've seen on this. We have considered it in light of previous cases. I must admit, I did seek guidance from this from our planning policy team, who were presented with all the evidence of this application. And they also provided safety consistency, the comments on those two schemes up there. And they have advised me that this is policy compliant, it has met the need.
The final one I was going to ask is related to a couple of conditions. One is ecology. In the past been told we shouldn't have to do all the ecology stuff up front. We can't condition it later. And we seem on this one for saying things like the badgers, that it might be slightly out of date, but we can come back and do further reports. So I just again like clarity as to why we can do that after the event this time, whereas in the past we said we need to do it up front. There's condition 20, which relates to ecology, and it has this very impressive list of bat boxes and all that sort of stuff. Deadwood, log, refugia, piles, which is great, but there's nothing in there that says it has to be retained after it's sold to the first occupant. So we could do all this stuff and it could be ripped out on day one. So is there something we should be doing there to protect it? Because there's no point making little hedgehog friendly fencing only to find that that's blocked on day one. I can't see anything that says it's retained. And also on the conditions that you mentioned about public transport, there's a travel plan in here that we're going to be conditioning. So on some sites, again, we've had developers who provided vouchers for public transport to encourage people to use public transport. Is that something that we should be building into the travel plan?
On the last point first, yes, we could, if members felt that was a more appropriate way of dealing with this, we would need to move the travel plan from a condition into the Section 106 agreement, because handing over money would need to be subject to a Section 106 agreement. If members felt that was a stronger way forward on travel planning. Go to the ecology, going to the badger bit first. I think the reason that approach has been taken here is there is a survey, they've done the badger surveys. It's just that survey was done roughly at the time of submission. It's been a while, so that's a belt and braces approach, just to check that the badgers haven't got back on site. Given what the majority of the site being used, or a big chunk of it being used as a builder's compound, I very much doubt that's the case, but it's belt and braces. There is a tail piece to condition 20. It does say, once installed, such features shall be retained at all times thereafter. Whether we're going to go out there and check there's still piles of logs, I think we have to be pragmatic on that. But certainly where bird and bat boxes have been installed, and the hedgehog friendly fencing, which is my hobby horse, yes, certainly we should be on top of that. What I would say, the flip side of that is this will be homes for 90 people. We encourage this sort of best practice thing to go in at construction. We would need to review pragmatically if someone decided they were allergic to something and these things need to be removed. We do our best.
Thank you. Councillor Sterling, then Councillor Martin and Councillor Hendry.
Thank you very much. I always hope that we've learnt from the past, and I always hope this, but you know what? Shared drives, small gardens cause neighbour disputes right from the word go, and the need for housing is so great, but I don't think we should be packing people in to where people's health and well-being is so vitally important. And I think to have a garden for most people is an essential. There should be a minimum space that we can give people, rather than try to force so many housing in, because you know what, people are so desperate for housing, they end up being in there, and most of the disputes happen. The shared drives I can't tell you how many times I've had to go and sort out shared drives. Parking on the front of people's housing. It's a reality. It isn't something that's not happening. It's happening every day. Most of the arguments that happen is about parking. And I just fear in the recommendations, I don't see anything about design. I don't see the design, the recommendations about design. I don't see anything that gives me a bit of confidence. And I'm just a little bit worried, Mr. Noon. If you can make me happy, I'd appreciate it.
Hopefully there will be some reassurance gained from pages 36 and 37. I do consider the sort of design and visual impact. There is a design code, wider design code for the whole North East Bridgewater development. That is quite elderly now, that design code. It's of its time, I would guess. It might not be the design code we would go with on a similar development if considered under current policies. But it does very much follow the principles of the design code that was set out for this North East Bridgewater development. In terms of the individual house types, they are using the same material, the same general proportions as the other houses on the adjoining parts of the site. As you would expect, I'm saying that is a logical continuation of that design and materials and general theme approach. I think you'd be struggling to say that we should actually, on this particular parcel, do something completely different in terms of the design. In terms of the parking arrangements first, I think these parking arrangements, I would hope, don't create conflict in that there's no shared areas between two properties. You can see that there are tandem parking spaces, for individual properties. There may be some conflict within that household about who gets the innermost parking space. I don't think that's, we can say that is a fundamental problem. A lot of the other properties have houses parking perpendicular outside their frontages. There's no other way they can use those. So hopefully those will be retained in perpetuity and available. They wouldn't be subject to sort of misuse. Coming up to the top part of the site, there may be temptation for some of these properties facing the Bund to try and park on the road if they, are just feeling that they're just stopping off and dropping off kids on shopping and don't want to go into the back area. That's human behaviour, though. I don't think that's a planning consideration in terms of a development that is unacceptable. We were careful to ensure that these areas of parking to the rear were open, that the parking is close to the properties that will be using it, and that there are sort of wide open views into the site from the surrounding areas. So I don't think there is the only shared surface really is these communal parking areas. And we have this area at the north here, but again that's on plot parking for individuals. There will always be the visitor. There will always be the lazy person who chooses to pop it on the curb outside the house. In the absence of parking restrictions to prevent that, we can't really prevent that at all. But what I would say is this is all essentially on plot parking. It will be available for electric charging vehicles. We have charging points. If people aren't dependent on parking sort of on the street where they wouldn't necessarily guarantee their space outside their house. So from that point of view, this should cater well for electric vehicles going forward in the future. The parking standards are what they are, requirements as of our current parking standards. We may revisit those in the future. They go up, they may go down. But in terms of the current parking standards, these houses, this proposal meets the expectation. I appreciate the concern that people won't use them as we intend them when we look at these plans and we're asking you to approve them. I struggle with that. I share some concerns that people will not use them as intended, but I can't see that adds up to a reason for refusal.
So if I may, Madam Chairman, so we can't condition it, that's what I'm asking. We can't
Condition that
better parking issues or anything, we can't do anything about that.
I think if the parking meets our standards, if the parking meets our standards, it's very hard to say what's wrong with it in plan terms to justify a reason for refusal. And people's behaviour as to whether they choose to park in their allocated parking space or pop it at the side of the road, I think it's not something we can control by condition.
Councillor Martin, Councillor Hendry, and then Councillor Bruce.
Sorry, I was just wondering if I could clarify the previous point with Councillor Slocum.
Oh,
sorry, apologies. It was just to make members aware of the draft placemaking and movement design principles that have been set out and adopted by the council. So there are sort of principles coming forward in terms of parking layout, design and things like that. So the ones that are relevant for this proposal, so first being reduce the need to travel by private car, looking at permeability, connectivity and not turning their back to the neighbours. So in terms of the design elements that have been highlighted by Adrian Noon already, and the connectivity in terms of the pedestrian routes into and through the site, which sort of mirror that requirement. It does say reduce parking provision, but that's always quite controversial given the parking issues. So the number of spaces that have been provided are compliant with current highways guidance in terms of bedroom numbers and parking spaces. So we're not proposing a reduced number of parking spaces necessarily with this scheme, but it does promote hard and soft travel plan measures, which is covered by the condition. In terms of design, it does say design parking to be unobtrusive, allow for future phasing out of parking to reduce carbon emissions. So in terms of the location of the parking, we are showing it to be secondary elements of the main road, which would also encourage natural traffic calming because of the sort of right angles to go into, which again is compliant with the guidance. And it does say reduce vehicle speeds and give priorities to pedestrians and cyclists. So again, the road and the arrangement, it does reduce the speed of vehicles, and you know, the open courtyard area, having occupied one of the properties somewhere else in Kingstown, the rear courtyard areas are often used by kids for cycling and things like that. So it does encourage sort of pedestrians and cyclists. And the material palettes, it said, should be simple, taking into account local context, and sort of avoiding big areas of tarmac. So the areas shown for the parking areas are shown to be a differing material to the main road, so it appears as a secondary element. So it's more complementary to the built development. But that's the emerging sort of placemaking and movement design principles that were adopted by the full council. It's not planning policy as yet, but it's had quite a good response in terms of the consultation and will be coming through the guidance for officers. But in terms of how this proposal complies with emerging design movement, I think we would say, well, we're quite happy it's in line with the direction of travel for the council.
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Back to the bund, I'm afraid. Adrian, Mr. Noon, the indicative landscape section, the cross section of the bund bit, yeah, that was the one. That one, yes. It shows us that the trees that we see above the shrubs, it's rather ambitiously saying that we're looking at 9 to 10 metres after 15 years, and that's fine. But is there any option for us to condition the height of the bund after 5 years? Somebody mentioned, I don't know who it was, maybe it was Tony, mentioned earlier that the land will slump, it will settle over time. But is there a way for us to revisit the bund in a certain amount of time, or to ensure that it's done properly and won't slump in the first instance? You're going to show me a condition where that's shown there, aren't you?
Yeah, I think hopefully condition 12 with the requirement for them to agree technical feasibility. We get the full construction methodology of the bund, and shall be maintained, and then the tail piece of that condition shall be maintained in accordance with the approved details. That, you know, if the bund was to slump to a point where it no longer complied with those with the agreed details, there would be a remedy there. We're also looking through the Section 106 agreement to agree that the maintenance of the fund, and hearing what you're saying there, we could certainly include within that the management and maintenance of the acoustic fence fund. We could include within that a requirement, you know, if it's, well, obviously if it blows over in the wind, they will have to replace it, and that we could also feel any slumping substance can also be put right through that mechanism.
Nice. Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hendry.
Thank you, Chair. Would you bring back up the slide, please, which on our screens it's page 23, and it's the aerial view showing Horsey and the deserted medieval village.
That one?
No, it showed the site outlined. So, yeah. Yes, there, that one.
Mm-hmm.
Bottom southwest corner, I think it is, of the new development, the proposed one, shows a vacant piece of land. Oh no, it shows it. the houses are all built on there, so that must mean that that slide is out of date. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think possibly the aerial sort of shows you yes.
Right.
So it's this area, it's under construction. Google flew over here, I think a year or two ago.
Yeah.
So there are houses on
But
that
that's
side.
built up there, so these are out of date, okay. Couple of points, that in its own right could be classed as an infill, we've had this before, because of the houses northwest and the ones at the southwest, that you could just class that as an infill. Given the planning history already for this plot of land, it would be very, very difficult to put up an argument to refuse this, very difficult. Thank you, Alan.
Oh, sorry.
That was really decent. Okay, it'd be very difficult to actually refuse this, given the planning history already. I've watched the presentation, it's gone on for some time now, listened to what everybody has said, which is fair comments. Conditions will have to be applied here, but that is yet to be spoken about, well, not spoken about, but actually determined and put in place. Given all of that, everything put in place, I propose we grant permission. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, councillor Hendry. We do have a couple more speakers, but can I just clarify, is that to our proposal to grant the officer's recommendation to approve with all the amendments, which I and the officers will go through before we take any votes?
Yeah.
Is that to include all the amendments?
Absolutely, that's why I said about the conditions. There are too many for me to start going through the list, but yes, you're absolutely correct. That's what you described, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm aware there's two more speakers, but before we go any further, we had a proposal to recommend. Is there a seconder for that at this stage? No, I'm not at this stage. Okay. Thank you. In that case, I will go forward to councillor Bruce.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering whether this probably applies to other applications as well, but has there been any consultation with NHS Somerset in the same way that we consult with the education officer about the capacity of schools? Is there any consultation with NHS Somerset about the capacity of our doctors, surgeries and dentists? And if not, why not? And is there any way that we could include something as a section 106 to consult with them? And if there is need for funds for the surgeries, etc., that can be provided through section 106? Thank you.
They haven't commented. I will need to check, or colleague is checking whether they were consulted. Now, we do know, and I'm not expecting them to ask for anything here, we at Follett's Farm, which is East Bridgewater allocation, a bit further south from this, but at that site, they specifically said they did not require contributions. The way they structure their requests for contributions are they only request, or the current practice is that they only request in relation to doctors, GP surgeons. If the local practice has sufficient surgery rooms, a physical space, to accommodate the increased patient list, then they don't ask for anything. And that's what they did down at Follett's Farm. I wouldn't be surprised if that is the same case here. Now, if that is a loose end, for which I apologise, we could follow them up if members felt that was vital. It is possible that this application was submitted and went out to first rounds of consultation prior to we introduced a new consultation to them at their request some years ago. And it may be that this application has been hanging around, may have been submitted prior to that occurring.
Does that mean, sorry?
Well, they weren't consulted. That would explain why they're not here. If members felt that was vital and needed reassurance on the point, we could chase them up for a comment. You could still, the recommendation could be to could still be the officer's recommendation, subject to confirmation of their position. If they have no objection, then that's fine, makes no difference. If they request a contribution, then, you could resolve to approve subject to inclusion of that request. I suspect they're probably not going to ask you, simply because on a nearby site, they confirmed that the local surgery had enough consulting rooms.
I'm just concerned that we continue with all these developments and, this is 90 dwellings. How many bed spaces? 250? 70?
Two years probably.
Each one, we keep adding people on and the capacity of the surgery is struggling. The dentist not to even mention.
There are two dimensions to that. What we cannot ask developers to do is contribute to the salary of an additional GP, because that funding follows the patient. It's where there's physically not enough room in the surgery, they will need an extra consulting room because the patient list will increase by very much, and we can secure a contribution to that. Our NHS colleagues are very adept at asking for that when it is necessary.
So I have another speaker before, just making sure that the response to that point had been clarified. Got Councillor Bradford, who has signalled to speak, and then Councillor Slope.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The level of debate on this application shows the number of things that really concern us. I'm going to read a statement, if I could. It says, principle, the site is in the employment zone for North East Bridgewater, within the approved traffic design code. This zone, alongside the M5, is identified as providing a positive shop window for Bridgewater, and a key aspiration to create an attractive frontage of high quality contemporary buildings that relate strongly to the landscape framework and in particular the Willowman. What's happening to Willowman? Going way down. I think it's a very difficult site to get right, and that's an awful long area to put a bung in if it doesn't please people. As they come in on M5, they've got to look at that bung area, and on top of that, there's a solar farm on the side of the motorway. Somebody had the vision to allow them to cut the trees down so you look running over on it. So really, I don't know, this bung job needs to be looked at, I think it does personally. And the reading job you sorted out from the point of view of drainage, if people can get in behind with their machines and clean that out. I just wonder, 15 years for trees to grow up and obscure something. I think it's just a bit, I just wonder if some of the trees could be put, say you've got the length of the bung like that, that's 15, 20 yards, you could incorporate some mature trees right in the actual bung now to break the bung up, so it wouldn't look so bad. Break the bung. Break the bung, there you are, break the bung. With mature trees.
Certainly, we can take that forward as a comment when we are looking at discharging the landscape condition, I think it's 24, with the specimen tree planting. So yes, from my experience of looking at similar bungs in similar locations, I don't doubt that with a good landscaping scheme, that will be achieved. At the moment, in terms of this creating a sort of the window to Bridgewater, was that the phrase you used? I mean, there is the current window to Bridgewater in this part of North East Bridgewater. That's probably a slightly better picture. So it is of these house types. Certainly the ones to the left of that picture are probably identical to the ones we're now looking at here, but that's another developer's version. So we're looking at 2-story brick with tiled roof houses of a certain proportion and detailing across a 70, 80 metre green strip. That would be a bit closer to a lot closer to the motorway. That would be moved. That moves 40 or so metres towards the motorway. That window, apart from being a bit closer, isn't going to change a lot, I don't think, given the house types we're looking at here. And in fact, they will disappear in time behind the landscape bump. So driving down the motorway, heading to Cornwall, looking right, the bund and the landscaping are what you will see, with the roofs visible above it. That I don't think is an offensive to the motorway. You will certainly still have the view, which way am I going? Yes, you will still have the view over the open area around the site of the Willow Man. That's outside of this application site, and the future for that Willow Man site is, I believe, is still up for debate. Some sort of alternative installation is being considered. But that is outside of that. But you do have these higher buildings around the circle that the Willow Man creates, those blocks of flats there. You can see the big roof in the background. That's on the Vistry site, that other employment site that went forward to residential. So we've created that ring of higher buildings around that setting there. And then as we come down here, those building heights drop. When we get to this site, they will move a bit closer to the motorway, but will then disappear with time behind the landscape bund. That is the sort of the overall design intent here, which I think if we are to agree houses here, we need that bund, that acoustic bund is essential, and that also provides the landscape screening for the motorway.
The problem is, Madam Chair, we're short of houses in the paper this morning, so I think your point of concern again, you haven't got a number of houses to house workers, headlines again today, and we're faced with difficult decisions sometimes. Thank you, Alistair. Thank you.
Councillor Slocum, and I think we have given this application a good airing now. So, and there are a number of conditions and section 106 suggestions that have been made. So I will be looking to sort of wrap up the debate shortly, but Councillor Slocum, you have indicated.
Just a quickie regarding the NHS, which I think is a very valid point. When we've spoken to NHS, I think Mr. Noon is right. They're generally on it. They know where they think they need, if they need intervention. There are two areas, I believe, in Bridgewater, just on the outskirts of Bridgewater, already are going to have medical intervention with their 106 agreement. That might be the reason. Not bad, I did not check, of course it's not, but I do think NHS are pretty good at knowing where they think the numbers don't stack up or whether they think the need is great. From that's what they've explained to me. So I think Mr. Noon's probably right on that one.
That's reassuring. Thank you. The only outstanding issue is the wording of condition 12 around the bun, and just to give some confidence that people won't be moving in, or construction won't have gone so far before the bund is actually tested to be to meet requirements.
Yeah. Okay. We could change the prior to commencement of requirement to prior to the commencement of the construction of the dwelling. Yeah, so that the bund is necessary to protect the dwellings. The detail of the bund is agreed prior to their construction, and the implementation trigger is prior to occupation.
May I? I think obviously the details of the bund is fundamental, but also a lot of points have been raised about the look of the bund as well. I just wonder whether it's possible, we're talking about agreement with the planning authority. Can that also be in combination with the chair, vice chair of the development committee, so that we've got some input there in terms of whether we think that the look of it is also in keeping? I don't know whether that's maybe too much, but I'm happy with the idea that they're not allowed to start constructing until the details of the bund have been set in stone and agreed. That's great, but I'm also a bit concerned about the aesthetics of it as well.
There are already, you can usually tell who we're going to consult by the reason for the condition. So we will certainly be consulting highways. National highways, what do they call this week? National highways, the owners of the motorway. They are very interested. So they will be consulted. And in terms of residential amenity, we will be consulting our environmental health officer to make sure it does the trick. We'll probably also be consulting our landscape advisors, such as they are in terms of best landscaping for it. You can ask that these things be run past chair and vice chair. It's not normal. We could end up snowing vice chair and vice chair over with a lot of conditions to charge. But yes, that's down
I
to
would leave that up to chair to decide.
We are overrun, aren't we? Overrun with work.
There will be a lot.
Sorry, councillor Ham first and then you, councillor Adford.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just confirm how you would enforce the condition that the bund had to be fixed and complete before any residency took place? We've got in our division, we've got an estate that was built 12 years ago where there's a condition that no residency could take place until there was a footbridge built for safety reasons. But the vehicle bridge had to be reinforced for equally safety reasons, and neither of those things have yet been done 12 years down the line. Thank you.
I know the situation, I know, apology, yes, I do know that situation well. Normally, that sort of condition, non-compliance with this condition is picked up by conveyancing solicitors. So the developers are very anxious to secure discharge of this because it trips up sales really badly. Where I think that sometimes it does arise is where maybe the developer is also going to be the landlord and they don't get tripped up because there aren't sales. In this instance, I would fully expect this to be self-policing in that I struggle to see that any resident would buy this or any potential purchaser solicitor would allow someone to buy this without this condition being discharged. Not beyond the realms of possibility. The consequences of that is we could serve a breach of condition notice requiring that person to vacate their house. It's pretty draconian if we get that far. So that's
But that
why
would be down to the person buying the house, not down to the person selling it or building it.
the consequence of losing sales usually focus developers' minds on ensuring their conditions are discharged. We would have remedies. They would be draconian at that stage. And we would rely on the threat of that, ensuring that it didn't happen. Relatively rare, I know the situation you're referring to, relatively rare that something of that order happen. Usually for other technical reasons.
Councillor Bradford.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Given it a bit of thought, that ban, that could be improved. You can get these wildlife flower mixes now that self-seed, and they do look very, very attractive. That's quite a big area, and that could be, the whole area could be broken up with that. A wildflower mix. They can make it very interesting when you come to Bridgewater. It has a shop window. When you come to Bridgewater and look at that bun, look at the shop window this is. Blackout days.
The planting is in consultation with the landscape officer, isn't it? I think we need to be careful about how far we go down the routes of making our own suggestions on
Indeed.
that score.
Indeed, we'll be looking at the technical build
Yeah.
with a lot of internal consultees. The management of it, ditto, the landscaping of it also will be a lot of internal consultees that have all expressed the interest at this stage in seeing the detail and external consultees.
Thank you. So I don't see any more speakers at this moment. Is now a good time just to clarify potential wording for the changes of conditions and suggestions that have been made regarding section 106 additions. If
So if I may clarify from my note, I've got to grant permission subject to the amends to conditions 4, 7, 16, 19, 23 and 11, the wording of such amendment conditions to be delegated to the officer and the chair and vice chairman. Sorry, let me just read this again. The wording of such condition to be agreed with the officer in conjunction with the chair and vice chair, and subject to any consultation response from the NHS concerning the securing of any financial contribution, if I got that right, Adrian. And then the third point that I've question marked is the travel plan. At the moment, it's a condition. Are we looking to put that into section 106?
And I have written down in regards to potential addition, section 106, to include a management requirement to add protection of subsidence subsidence of the fence in the future.
And apologies, I did miss off condition 12. I just add that into my note.
That I think is correct. I think that I think what members have suggested is that the section 106, those 2 points are already in there. We add in there also the travel planning measures and delete the corresponding condition. That will then enable bus contributions to be sought through the travel plan. We negotiate on that. We also have a section 106 obligation for any NHS contribution towards surgeries that was requested. And then we have the amendments to those conditions that have just been read out, including condition 12, to be prior to the commencement of the houses, and then the deletion of the travel planning condition.
Thank you for that. So with those clarifications, councillor Hendry, are you still happy to make the proposal to recommend the officer's recommendation to approve?
Yes, I stand by what I said.
Thank you. Thank you. I am looking for a seconder for that recommendation. Thank you, councillor Ferguson. So we have a proposal and a seconder. All those in favour, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 in favour.
And those against?
So 1 against.
And those abstaining?
1, 2, oh, did you not vote? No, she took her own vote. Oh, did you? I think I might have counted you, Catherine. So, Jill. Sorry, Jill. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 abstentions.
Can I please take advice on, as there are more abstentions than in favour?
I would suggest that because we have more abstentions in favour, we need to know what those abstentions or concerns are. And it may be that we need further information to be able to inform members to make a decision on this matter. And the only other issue we can deal with that is by way of deferral.
Chair, could I comment, please? In terms of abstentions, how it works is that if you are abstaining, you are not deciding either way. So by abstaining, you have not made a decision on the application in favour or against. So the votes that count are the for and against votes. The abstentions, whilst it might be something for us to look at in terms of why members didn't feel comfortable enough to vote one way or another, abstentions are just choosing not to vote on it. It's the for or against that count for the decision.
Then on that basis, Chair, can we have a short adjournment for 10 minutes so that I can actually take some further advice on the matter?
In that case, I will propose a comfort break for 10 minutes and then we will return for the final decision. So yeah, returning at 4 o'clock, please. So confirmation of the position regarding the voting.
So members, the clarification in line with the Constitution is that the result of any decision making is the majority of votes cast. So in this particular case, this scheme has been carried.
Thank you. So we then move on. So that application is approved, and so we move on to agenda item 6, which is on page 61. Can I ask Mr. Titchener, please, to start the presentation? Thank you.
Well, then what happened to them?
Thank you. So yeah, this is an application, the address or location is land south of Labour's Close, it's in Woollavington. It's a scheme for the erection of 14 affordable dwellings. So just wide out sort of aerial plan. So Woollavington just to the sort of northeast of Bridgewater, one of our larger villages. And the site is on the western side of the village. So this is the plot, these two sort of rectangular shaped fields here. Labour's Close is actually this development immediately on its north side, which will be accessed through. So you can see with the sort of location plan that I've shown here, the access comes through the first scheme, providing access to the two fields adjoining. So it is doing just a couple of photos just to get some context. So it is an existing sort of effectively an overgrown sort of meadow at the moment, bounded by a sort of mature hedgerow and tree planting. There is, as shown by this image here, a central mature hedgerow which would need to be lost and some foliage tree planting with it to facilitate the development. So that would need to come out. So that's showing some photos. And then this is effectively the layout as would come in from the existing site to the north. So there is an existing sort of turning head from where it will come in, and then it will come in. So it's 14 units, access to offer what would be a very simple sort of T-shaped road layout. So there is space for a LAP, so a local area of play at the sort of far eastern side. There is an ecological buffer zone on the western side just because of some ecological constraints. And then in terms of the principal development, so this is an affordable housing led scheme. So Woollavington is defined in the local plans a tier 2 settlement. So those are some of our large villages like sort of Wedmore, Cannington. They have their own housing target under policy T2A, so a certain number of houses that's supposed to come forward in those villages to meet district need. So in the case of Woollavington, there is already a scheme which has consent for the target for Woollavington. So that was a scheme known as Woollavington Hill, brought forward by Wayne Homes, which was for 225 dwellings. So that's a part full, part outline scheme that's got consent, I think in 2022, a decision was issued. So that's policy T2A. So policy T2A sets an overarching sort of target for these larger villages, but meeting district-wide housing needs rather than local housing needs specifically. Then under that, there was a sub-policy, policy T2B, and that set a basis for if you have unmet housing needs in these locations still, then there's a mechanism for bringing forward additional other sites. And that's effectively the basis for bringing this scheme forward. So in terms of the principal development, I've got an excerpt here from the housing needs assessment, quite a bit on the screen. I'm just going to go through a few points first. So policy TTB talks about that proposals must fill an identified need for affordable housing as evident in an up-to-date housing needs assessment. Now, there was a new parish council sponsored housing needs assessment, which was produced by our council's housing needs team, the Duncan Harvey's team, in March last year in 2023. So the table shown here is an extract from the conclusions of that document, because it identified that there was an outstanding need for 46 affordable rented units in the parish. So that's this line here. There's quite a bit on here, so I appreciate it's quite a lot to take in. So the housing needs assessment, a need for rented units. So this is the sort of split in terms of the size, but overall there was still an outstanding need for 46 units. So the survey, when it was undertaken, had to acknowledge the fact that the Wayne Homes scheme was there and was going to bring forward 225 units with a requirement for 30% affordable housing. So quite a chunk of affordable housing to come forward as part of that scheme. So the Woollavington scheme has the potential to meet some of that need, which has been identified in the housing needs survey, potentially. So that's what this line here in the report indicated. So in terms of the rented provision, these number of units were going to come forward as part of that scheme. That was the identifier, the intended split. So that is going to bring forward a total of 26 affordable rented. Now there's other provision. So in terms of intermediate type housing, so not affordable rented, so we're sort of more likely talking about shared ownership type products. And there was the housing needs survey specific to Woolhampton indicated a lesser demand for those, but the Woolhampton Hill scheme is effectively over providing relative to local needs on that metric. So it kind of identified that there's a bit of a mismatch locally in terms of what the need is, in terms of what's coming forward on the Wayne Homes scheme. The primary issue is that there's effectively a shortfall of 20 units affordable rented on in terms of the Wayne Home scheme against the need. So there's 46 people locally that have a need for an affordable rented unit. So they wouldn't necessarily be able to afford an intermediate product because shared ownership, the higher threshold you're looking to buy in those affordable rented, that's all you'd be able to afford. And the housing needs survey does benchmark people's and investigate people's specific affordability requirements when coming to these conclusions. So the scheme as proposed is bringing forward a mix of 1 bed, 2 beds and 3 beds. Now, the affordable housing team are of the view that that scheme will help to meet the unmet need identified in the housing needs assessment. So, i.e., some of the outstanding needs that's not going to be met by the other scheme. The policy requires that such schemes come forward providing at least 40% affordable housing. So if you bring forward a T2B type scheme, you only normally need to provide 40% affordable housing to be policy compliant. The rest would normally be cross-subsidised through market housing. The applicant's not trying to do that in this case. They're bringing forward, because they're shell housing, they're bringing forward 100% affordable housing scheme. So that has a chance of meeting a greater proportion of the outstanding need. Effectively what could be seen as residual need. So on that basis, it's considered that the principal development is acceptable, subject to other consideration of other planning impacts. What I would say is there is the scheme that's coming forward as part of the Wayne Home scheme is providing district level housing, is there to meet district level housing needs. So it's effectively almost these allocations and some of the housing targets from the larger villages aren't there to meet directly or only the specific housing requirements arising in that village. So they're not there just to meet local needs only. So they're not subject to local lettings criteria in a way that, say, if this scheme was granted, there would be a local lettings policy attached to any section 106 to make sure those people were allocated. So there is a possibility that some people locally with a housing need could be met by the Wayne Home scheme, but it's not guaranteed. That notwithstanding, the Wayne Home scheme itself, even if it allocated all its properties to local residents, there'll still be an outstanding need. There'll still be at least 20 people who wouldn't be able to afford an affordable rented property in the village. And then, so just coming on to some other matters in terms of design, layout, and visual impact. So as stated, the dwellings are laid out around a very simple T-shaped road layout. The units are a mixture of short terraces, as you can see here, short terraces, and semi-detached units. So the plan on the left, just useful, just showing how it sort of knits in with the existing Labour's first scheme that came forward, or what was done about 10 years ago. Same applicants, as I understand it. There is a local area of play which was introduced into the scheme during the determination of it, because the size of the scheme warranted on-site play provisions. So that's been added. That is to the satisfaction of the Parks and Open Space Officer. In terms of the dwelling design, they do sort of primarily take their cues from the adjoining Labour's close scheme. So in terms of their height, their form, their design, and their appearance, they're not dissimilar to the adjoining properties. The materials of buff brick and primarily off-white render with concrete tiles will aid assimilation with the existing development. The rear of the properties is bounded by close border fencing. That was something that was put in, particularly on the western side, at the request of the crime prevention officer. Originally, it was a more open sort of fencing, but they had concerns there, so that's been amended and changed. So overall, it's quite a small, simple layout, but we would consider it to be acceptable. So in terms of the amenity impacts, trying to achieve an acceptable relationship with existing properties to the north is obviously the main factor there. So care has been taken to ensure that they do have an acceptable relationship, and that's particularly in regards to sort of plots 11 to 14 that have a separation distance of 19.5 metres to the rear elevations of the existing of those nearby properties. So originally plot 14 was closer, so the ones that were closest to the end of the arrow here sort of extend had a projection not dissimilar to that. So we asked for that to be pulled back just to get some extra separation space. So 19.5, I mean, it's a rule of thumb, but our rule is about 20 metres separation. So we are thereabout. Plots 1 and 2 here, so this is plots 1 and 2. So there's a slightly shorter separation between these. So they have a separation of about 17 metres, but they don't have any north-facing windows on their first floor, so there isn't actually going to be any opportunities for sort of into visibility from that elevation. It's been designed so their windows are facing the other direction. So there's no overlooking or loss of privacy that would arise from that part of the proposal. Internally, all the units are well proportioned. Each benefits from size rear gardens. There are conditions proposed to minimise impacts of construction, so and matters such as contaminated land, the hours of operation, and submission of a construction management plan. But the advice from environmental health and our own assessment is that with those measures, the scheme would be acceptable in terms of its amenity impact. In terms of highways and parking, the existing Labour's Close has its own access onto a high road to the north, so it would make use of that. So these are photos. That one's there, stood opposite, sort of looking at it, and this is looking back towards that part of the village. This one here is stood in the access and looking back out sort of west towards the roads that head towards Puriton. You can see from those photos that the existing access offers good visibility in all directions. The proposal includes 37 parking spaces. There's slight inconsistency in the report because it mentioned 35 in one place, it mentioned 37 elsewhere. The correct number should say 37 parking spaces provided. We consider that to be compliant with county parking standards. And accordingly, they have commented on the application and raised no objection to the transport impacts, the parking provision, and therefore they are satisfied. So overall, in terms of highways and parking, we would consider it to be acceptable. In terms of ecology and trees, so there are various ecological recommendations regarding replacement of the hedgerow planting. So that's what the hedgerow that I mentioned had to be lost. So and control of works and control of lighting that need to be imposed and are proposed in the report as mitigation conditions. There is a badges set, a replacement badges set proposed. So I mentioned there's that ecological buffering zone. So there's an existing badges set that they need to close part of. So badge sets are sort of usually in a bit of a network. Sometimes they have sort of multiple entrances. So they need to close part of that to facilitate development. That needs a license from Natural England. There's a condition requiring that they secure that license. They have to go in and do the replacement badge set before they can then come in and get the license for the closure of existing. So there's a kind of sequencing to it, but it's all to the satisfaction of the county ecologists as long as it's controlled by the conditions that's set out in the report. There are some trees, as I mentioned, that have to be lost as part of the proposal I showed on the previous plan. There's some shown within that sort of central hedgerow. They include 5 elm trees, 7 ash trees, and a small elm group and the elm hedgerow. So they are needed to facilitate the proposal. Now, the advice that we'd had is those particular species are subject to ash dieback, Dutch elm disease. So it's quite possible that they will be lost in due course, and therefore the proposal is that we would not really object to their loss regardless. They would be quite poor species with short lifespan. Nonetheless, there is replacement planting throughout, and that's taking account of types that were recommended by the council's landscape officer, landscape and tree officer at the time, and there were some changes made just to make sure that the trees that were proposed were most appropriate to the setting in terms of their canopy sort of spread, and could work within proximity of residential development. For example, you don't want to put a tree that's going to go too close to a house that's going to require someone to unnecessarily prune it back and affect itself. So getting the right specimens was important. That's been included. So there are conditions about ecology and trees, but the consultees on those matters are satisfied that they offer the acceptable protection. Just on drainage matters, got a detailed technical plan showing the drainage proposals. Just one point of clarification, the report says that site drainage is via relocated existing drainage channel. So there was a very shallow, mouse on here, a very shallow existing sort of ditch which ran along this part of the site. That's being relocated at the request of the lead local flood authority to run around the outside of the site. That's not the only point of drainage. So the point of clarification in the report is the site isn't solely being drained by that. There are the swale was being removed, but the new development is being drained by a combination of things, including soakways, permeable paving, and a restricted discharge into the existing network by on-site attenuation. So I just wanted to make sure that was absolutely clear. The lead local flood authority have been very involved in drainage discussions and are satisfied with the proposals. In terms of economic benefits, we would attach a condition to secure a portion of the local labour agreement in effect, so the proportion of people working on site work from the local labour pool. So just to summarise, so the scheme provides affordable housing to meet local unmet need. We don't consider there are any matters which can't be addressed by condition. So the recommendation is to grant, subject to preparation of 106, to secure the affordable dwellings with a local lettings policy, as would be appropriate in this case, and the local area of play. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Titchener. We've had two speakers on this application. First, can I ask Alan Sharp of Wellabington Parish Council to come to the table, please? Thank you. Got three minutes. Just let us know when you're ready to start. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The Parish Council understands and accepts the need for development, but, and it is a big but, this has to be appropriate in the local context and within policy. It is on the latter that the Parish Council is objected to this application. As is pointed out in the report, this application is being considered under policy T2B, which is only applicable when the minimum growth level set out in policy T2A are reached and remains unmet affordable local housing need. And from all the information and evidence that the Parish Council has, we believe that this clear policy trigger point has not been reached. This is shown by the approved application known as Wayne Homes, commits the delivery of 53 affordable homes in accordance with policy T2A. So to be compliant to T2B, there should be a need to clearly demonstrate that affordable housing need is greater than 53, which is not the case as evidenced by the Wellabington Housing Needs Survey report March 2022, which identified the need for 34, and by some additional information research commissioned by the Parish Council in March 2023, which identified a need for 48, which was pointed out in the officer's report. Both are below the 53 which were committed. These surveys, within these surveys, it was identified there is a variance in the affordable housing mix, rented and intermediate, from need and committed. And it is this the application report is using to justify the unmet affordable housing need. However, this is not a material consideration to show compliance to policy T2B, as any unmet need is against affordable housing number, not against the rented or intermediate mix. Also, contrary to the report and policy T2B, there has been no meaningful or detailed discussion between the Parish Council and the applicant for either this application or a previous withdrawn one. In conclusion, the Parish Council respectfully requests the Planning Committee rejects this application as it is not compliant to policy T2B and has not demonstrated an unmet local housing need, and we believe the acceptance would be in policy deviation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sharp. We'll respond to the issues raised when we go on to our next speaker. Thank you. Can I call Angela Gascoigne to the table, please, or shall? And as usual, there's 3 minutes, and just let us know when you'd like to start.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start then. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. As you may be aware, Shall is a Sedgemoor-based community housing association, and we're committed to providing quality, affordable housing for local people in our communities. We are an existing landlord in Woollavington, and we do own the homes which are immediately adjacent to the application site, as you've been told. At the time of the March 2023 Housing Needs Survey, there were a significant number of households and families who needed an affordable home to rent within the next 12 to 24 months. And with the time that's elapsed, this is even more acute, and we believe none have come forward or commenced in the interim period. Assuming no delays, we are able to secure Homes England grant funding to deliver these much needed affordable homes for rent. However, that funding needs to be locked in as soon as possible via the release of the Planning Commission. The modest size of the scheme, together with it being a detailed planning permission, means we can deliver homes to the families and households who need them to rent in the short term. Whilst the planning officer has covered much of the detail, the scheme itself includes the following: both small and family housing to accommodate a range of households, families and children, homes which meet or exceed the national space standards, a sustainable edge of settlement development which does not connect to the gas network, the inclusion of renewable technologies including air source heat pumps, solar PV and electric vehicle charging, and as the planning officer said, the provision of a local play area for the benefit of residents. We are committed to working with Woollavington Parish Council to agree the wording of the local lettings policy, as well as other matters of detail within the development. And in policy terms, we believe the matter of principle to be relatively straightforward. There is provision in the adopted local plan to support the delivery of affordable housing in Tier 2 settlements where it meets an unmet local housing need. Our development directly addresses some of the immediate unmet need in Woollavington, some of it, and those 46 households and families who need an affordable home to rent right now. Policy compliance aside, I'm finished by returning to the purpose of Shall Housing Association. We are completely there to provide homes for people and families in need, a safe, warm and
Mr. Titchenham, would you like to respond to Mr. Sharp regarding compliance with policy T2B? I know you raised it in your original presentation, but I think it's well worth going through again.
I'll come back to this slide because I think it's the most relevant one in terms of the number. I know Mr. Sharp's talking about that there's 53 units scheduled to come forward as part of the Wayne Homes scheme, and that is in excess of 46 people or families that are identified as being in need in Woollavington through this report. So on the face of it, yes, there is there is more coming forward. The problem is it's an issue of tenure. And the tenure provided by the Wayne Homes scheme isn't going to reach the number of people that need an affordable rented unit in Woollavington. So whilst that scheme would come forward, there will still be people that won't be able to get their housing needs met by that scheme alone. And that's assuming in the scenario that the Wayne Homes just soaked up Woollavington-based need. It's probably not going to, because there's a district-wide scheme that's not subject to local letting. The actual overall need is probably even greater. Probably has even less of a chance of being able to meet some of that. So there'll probably more people with unmet needs. What this scheme is doing is bring forward a very specific type of tenure to meet a very specific type of need, and that is over and above what the Wayne Homes is going to do. But the evidence is there, shows us that there are people with that type of need that need their needs met, and it's not going to be met by the other scheme. I think the other point that Mr. Sharp made, I don't dispute what he said in terms about the engagement of the applicant with the parish council matter. And yes, I think that is an oversight. That's absolutely something we would be encouraging of all applicants. And it's something I've spoken to the agents about, and I think with hindsight, they acknowledge that actually that's very much a shortcoming. There's an element that Duncan Harvey's forward housing team were in very regular contact with them throughout the period because there was renegotiation of the new housing needs assessment, and maybe the applicant sat back. I'm not trying to make excuses for them, but but there was that sort of going on, and they were sort of in discussions with Duncan throughout. But I think they're aware of it. It's a point I've made to them, and I'm sure they've heard what's been said today.
Thank you, members. Councillor Bradford.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Obviously, the PR in particular put on this application that the previous, so I do listen to what the chairman of the parish council said, and overall, I got to think, what happened? What a lucky place they are. What a lucky place, have a development like this. Car parking, solar panels, not pushed in too tight. Villages would cut their hands off and get developments like this. They really would. My own village in particular, because some people moaned about a bit of drainage here and there. It was checked out, and how things are that much different. And I think that, I just think it's good for Wilhampton. I know the area quite well. And on top of all that, the parish council will have a payment of SIL, and you can do what you like with that sort of money. And very often you can bring that little shine to things very often with that bit of money been spent regarding that. So I'm gonna move the recommendation, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bradford. We have Councillor Hendry who's asked to speak.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just like the point clear though. Sorry, do you want to speak, please?
Sorry, Councillor Hendry. I was distracted there and I didn't hear anything that you said.
I was only saying thank you.
Oh. Did you say anything?
I only said thank you,
That's why I
Chair.
didn't hear it then.
I saw the case officer John put a hand up. Speak for me.
It was just to clarify a point that Councillor Bradford said. As 100% affordable housing scheme, they will be exempt from SIL. There is still an exemption process they have to go through to be exempt from SIL, but they would be exempt from SIL as 100% affordable housing.
In the notes, it says SIL payments.
SIL payments are required for residential properties, so they have to apply to be exempt, but they are exempt as affordable houses.
Still good without SIL.
Councillor Hendry.
Let me try again, are you with me?
Yes. All it.
Right, just to clarify one little point for me, page 64, paragraph 5, the CPO has concerns about the stop fence going around the site. And it goes on a bit, which I don't like to read. And then it's in the rear access past 4 and 5 and 8 and 9 should have a gated entry. Is this a recommendation? Has it already been agreed with the developer, or would it be attached as a condition afterwards? Because it doesn't actually say that on there. Thank you.
Yeah, we've worked through the changes with the applicant to pick up the points by the crime prevention officer. So they made a package of changes to the fencing and the gating around the scheme in response to those. And we did a subsequent consultation on some of the changes. So that's been picked up. So some of the things about the stop-proof fencing. I think they tried to provide a subtle rural edge almost to the scheme at one point, providing stop-proof fencing, but actually the crime prevention officer's concern is like, well, that's how does you stop someone getting around the back now? So changes were made in response to that to pick up on those things. So that's been incorporated into the scheme through a reconsultation.
To come back. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. That's cleared that entirely for me. On the basis of that, I think this is a fairly straightforward proposal. It's not complicated. I've read through it as well. Everything seems in order for me. So I'd be happy to second Councillor Bradford. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Filmer and Councillor Slocum.
Thank you. You know, the previous councillors again welcome the development in principle. We do need affordable housing in the villages. I'm just looking for some reassurance again from the case officer, because when I read this report, the whole background as to what qualifies and doesn't in terms of does this meet policy or not was quite difficult to get your head around the numbers. And in effect, I think that the question that was raised by the parish council is the policy tenure blind or is it not? Because what we're saying is it meets it if you take into account the tenure, but technically the numbers don't meet it if you don't take into account the tenure. So I'm just trying to get my head around, is the policy tenure blind or can we take into account tenure? Because we obviously, it's policy led, so we just need to make sure we're on the right side of it.
No, it's not. You have to take into account what the need is. You know, so is the scheme going to meet the identified need? And so it's not just a question of numbers; it's a question of tenure as well. Because you know that what we know from the evidence is that there is still going to be an outstanding need, even with the other scheme coming forward. So you can take into account tenure, and it's more than just numbers, because you have to work out whether are people's housing needs being met. And what we know from the evidence, or what the evidence indicates, is even with the other scheme, it wouldn't be. So yes, you are entitled to take into account tenure, along with just as well as the numbers, and working out that there is existing housing need here.
Thank you. I mean, that is obviously it applies to this tier 2 parish, but it will apply to a number of others with others coming forward in the future. So we're in effect saying that T2B policy will allow tenure to be taken into account when we're looking at whether exemption sites can come forward. Okay. The other thing, just wanted to check, and again, it's back to the SIL, which isn't there. The education department raised the fact that there was a requirement for a contribution because there is insufficient need, there's insufficient supply in one element of education. And they were saying, oh, that could be met from the SIL. Well, we've just been told there is no SIL. So how do we meet that education need?
Questions?
Can I come in on this one? Whilst this scheme on its own does not provide SIL is a collective pot that gets pulled in from all other developments that are still liable. So at some point when they need it, we will have a request from the education department for SIL receipts, and we won't be questioning where it came from or who attributed to it. But there is a collective pot that is covering a number of infrastructure levy items.
Just ask one last one, which is in terms of so the other thing I was going to ask was the parish mentioned obviously the meaningful and robust conversations that haven't happened. I think Shall offered that they will want to have discussions with the parish council about agreeing the local lettings policy. Can we ensure that that's conditioned that will actually happen? I presume they've got local lettings on their first phase anyway, but it is important that the parish do have sight and involvement in the local lettings policy on developments.
Yeah, it's controlled through the Section 106 agreement rather than a condition, which is a negotiated process, you know, between the council, us, you know, and you know the landowner, you know, subject to it. I think what we can do through that process is, and we will be guided by Duncan Harvey's team as well, who'll be leading on it, is feedback what we've heard at this meeting, certainly, about the need to involve all parties in agreeing that, and just so that they're aware. I mean, it's a negotiated process. There's opportunity from the council to steer that in terms of to meet the request, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Slocum.
Thank you. I was also going to ask about the education because I was also going to ask about the parish council, but it would have taken me an hour to get my bit out, whereas Councillor Filmer has done it very succinct. I was disappointed about 9 places that would not be available for education purposes. And also I wanted to ask about the SIL, which you've now explained, which is it's a little complicated, to be fair, you know. I also would like to say that I think we need to, Shall needs to understand that parish councils are vitally important, and communication, if you're going to build and you want to do something, then communication's got to be key. Because you need them both together, working together, and I think that's very, very key. And that is something obviously learned from today. So I think the parish chairman has done a good job in bringing this forward. The scheme is very good, but I just was disappointed about the education. And I'm just worried that if you haven't got enough for 9 places now coming in with 14 homes and you haven't got any still, I just still didn't quite understand how you were going to actually get it.
I mean, I think it's difficult where the government has introduced certain exceptions to the SIL regs, you know, and there's certain types of development they want to basically say these types of development shouldn't be having to pay SIL. And in normal circumstances, they would say most development would. And because of the nature of the project, it's affordable housing where the values are much lower, the plot values you get are much lower. They've introduced an exemption. It creates a bit of an issue with stuff like this because actually it's not making a contribution, but it's been done because actually it's bringing forward some other positive social benefit instead, in this case, social housing. So I totally get the point. But I also see the reason why the government has introduced an exemption for this type of project because of other reasons, other benefits it does.
If I may, Madam Chairman, I just hope that we don't in future think that children that come from social, affordable housing don't expect an education. Do you know what I mean? I think the two things are succinct. And I think that's something that in this report, it looks a bit like that, so I just wanted to raise that, please.
Certainly wasn't the intention. No, and the SIL pot is a pot that already exists from other developments within that locality, isn't it? So that's whether to still exist. So I'm not seeing any other members. Oh, yeah, Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Chair. This is probably one for Dawn, actually. Excuse me. Regarding the lettings policy that Councillor Slocum was talking about a moment ago, does the parish council have an option for input on that lettings group board or panel or whatever it is, or is it entirely external to the village, to the parish?
Normally, as a matter of course, it's an agreed wording between ourselves, the developer, and the local affordable housing manager, because ultimately we need it to capture and deliver the identified need that's been identified as part of the housing needs assessment. Given that the applicant is here and the parish council is here, obviously they've heard the concerns of the parish council and the parish council wanting the engagement on that wording. It's an open process that we send drafts back to the applicant to agree the wording of. We're more than happy if they want to loop in the parish council for those discussions, but it's not something we would mandate as part of the process because the technical requirement is to deliver the identified need in accordance with the housing assessment.
Thank you. I'm not torn on the decision. I mean, I think we all agree that we want more social housing across Somerset, but I do feel a bit bad for the parish because we now learn that they're not getting the SIL benefit. They're not getting a say in what might happen to the properties. They're getting the extra traffic. All the other stuff's weighed against them. But we do get the social housing, which is county-wide, not parish-wide.
Sorry, to correct, this scheme is local housing need. So it's the local housing need to Wall-Evington.
Yeah.
So whilst the parish council may not by mandate be involved, they may still be involved through choice, but that's down to the applicant because it's discretionary. It is the local need of the local residents to Wall-Evington that are being served by this development. It's the large developments that have provided some of the strategic need, which is why we've got the misbalance now with the 10-year delivery on the larger sites.
That's lovely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have Councillor Bradford has proposed to agree the officer's recommendation to grant permission. That's been seconded by Councillor Hendry. All those in favour, please show. I think it's unanimous. Thank you very much. Thank you. So now we move on to the final application of the afternoon. Agenda item 7 on page 83, and this is regarding an application in Church Lane, Brent Knoll. And Councillor Filmer has already left the table, so thank you. Okay, so Mr. Noon, are you taking us through this one? And just be a moment to set up the presentation.
Okay. Yep, thank you very much. This is an application for erection of extension, side and rear extension to this property. There is also a detached garage to be erected, and there is a conversion of the existing double garage to provide a home office. Along with some associated alterations to the access reflecting this new garage. So this is the site junction of a Church Lane opposite the school. Property sits on the corner, it is semi-detached, just slightly closer in there. The other half is just to the southeast in this photograph, and then there's the road to the northwest. That's where the access is, and there are some trees around the perimeter site. So for the purposes of the red line showing the property attached garden, rear garden.
Sorry. Okay,
Better,
thank you.
thank you. And then the access is just to the side off of Church Lane corner there. So there is the existing layout with property and the garage, the existing garage, which would be converted in the rear. The access is just to the front. That's over there. So just in here, survey boring levels on it. There's a group of conifers, the darker green, they would be retained. The other tree just next to those indicated there will be removed to facilitate the garage. And there is the site layout. Large garage in the front garden, converted garage in the rear to provide a home office. And then we have this sort of array of extensions. Essentially a little bit along the front, you can just about see the outline of the original property. And then we have a side extension, that's also a rear extension. And really just to help you visualize the extent of extension, there's in pink, the extra bits added to the house and the garage to the front. Then the alterations to the access, there will be a couple of parking spaces provided as well outside an area of understanding. So just quickly to show you, there's the existing property, a little bit of an oddity, a very unique property, never seen one quite like this. The dividing line is through the ridge of the main part here. And then you've got half of this, the original property with some additions over to the side. So you're fairly unique and sort of one-off, almost, one of a pair, one-offs. If that's right, sorry. And then there's that existing rear garage. The extensions are sort of wrapper. The top one is the front elevation, so a wraparound flat roof extension going out to the side. There's the side, so it sort of extends out, and then to the rear here, where you have those two sort of wings coming off at the sort of angles. There in plan form, maybe a little more helpful. You have the sort of bit at the side here, slight projection and a balcony at the front, and then these two sort of rear bits that sort of stick off at well, so 90 degrees to each other at the rear. And then there's the roof plan with some solar panels on top. And they're all flat roofed. That's the new front garden garage. So a large double door, up and over type door, and then sort of a sloping roof. Very gently just to get a fall on it, but essentially flat roof in terms of visual appearance. And then continuing the same theme, it's composite cladding, not actual timber, but it's composite cladding, flat roof detailing. And then just moving on to the photograph. So just stood in the road out the front, well, back to our case officers, back to the school. You can see the pair of properties there, the white one there, slightly to the centre left of the picture. And then just swinging round, there is that group of conifers that will be retained. The bare deciduous tree there is removed. The boundary treatment gets planted up a bit more. And looking down the side there, right there. So there's just stood in the lane at the side, just looking in across the front of the property through the existing gates. Essentially stays in the same, just get widened a little bit to the access. A bit further back down, so you can see really the rear there. And then stood in the front garden, looking straight at the property. The white wall there is sort of like a screen wall, sort of separates the front from the back gardens. And then just looking, this is the garage would be essentially here. And then looking down the side, there's that existing garage. And then just looking at the back of the property. So in this instance, we consider there to be the sole issue as contentious here is the visual impact. We are concerned as officers that the scale and design of these flat roof extensions is not, it doesn't really reflect the character of the building itself or the locality. In their own right, we don't have problems with this sort of extension. They're normally to the rear. We did make some suggestions about maybe omitting the bit of the front bit and reducing slightly the side extension, given that the side extension would be so widely viewed. We also have concerns about the large garage, which is essentially we consider to be so far forward of the building line as to potentially create an alien feature in the front garden. We do acknowledge there will be some screening of the trees, but we feel it would still be unnecessarily intrusive there. So that is the sole issue in terms of parking arrangements and access. They're all fine. No concerns about the level of parking. No concerns about impact on any neighbouring property. The sole issue here, and I do accept this is this design is maybe a like it or loathe it type design. We don't have a problem with the design in its fundamental essence. We just think too far forward, particularly with the garage, and too prominent in the street scene for the forward projecting element and side extension. If they were reduced, we would have been happy to support this. Unfortunately, I couldn't agree, and I'm afraid the recommendation is one of refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Noon. We've got two speakers on this item, and I've asked the first speaker, Councillor Bob Filmer, Divisional Councillor, to come forward, please. You have 3 minutes, and just let us know when you're ready to start.
Thank you very much. Yep, thank you, members. I mean, for those of you who've known me on the committee for a while, they know I'm not a great fan of modern contemporary design. But I think in this particular case, this actually meets a need. What we've got is, as you've seen, the original character of the building is quite unique. It's a pair of semis. It's interesting to note that a little while ago, we had another planning application on this site, which was for a property to be built, which was 2-storey. We had huge numbers of objections from the surrounding properties. Parish Council objected to it as well, on the basis of the impact it was going to have across the road. There are bungalows, behind there are predominantly bungalows. The applicant has actually, in this case, designed this, I think, specifically to try and help the neighbours. By keeping it low and wrapping it around, it means that the impact both on the street scene and the neighbours is minimal. And I think from a character point of view, by keeping it down, you will still see the original character of the building, because the element that protrudes above will still be visible, and you will see that in that context. I think that in terms of the street scene as well, I know that the officer recommended potentially an extension along the ridge line that is currently shown towards the road. I think if the applicant had taken that, you would end up with a very large amount of roof looking up the street as you come down from church, down Church Lane. And so it would have a bigger impact on the street scene than what is proposed. So I do understand this is very much in the eye of the beholder application, but I think the applicant has done absolutely everything they can to minimise their impact on their neighbours and the rest of the village. And I think from my own point of view, I would hope that you would be able to support this application. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Filmer. And you now need to leave the room.
Absolutely.
We will call you back in.
Thank you.
Can I call the next speaker, please, which is Andrew Holmes, the applicant. If you'd like to come to the table, please. And the 3 minutes.
Just ask Victorian P10 is screen rather than that one, which obviously is the one with the multicolours. Right. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Andrew Holmes. I am the applicant, and just for clarity, I am also the owner of Landon Consulting. My in-house architect has largely dealt with the drawings and the application and the consultation of planners. But just so you're aware, it is going to be the home for myself and my son, who's 12 years of age. It's a new start for us after 2 or 3 terrible years, resulting in the loss of his mother on Christmas Day 2022. Moving forward, I hope you've had an opportunity to see the supporting document which we submitted to the officers during the initial consultation period, dated the 5th of the 1st, 24. It's very much a sort of watered down design and access statement, but it does, I feel, adequately set out the reasoning behind the design ethos and where we got to and why I think it should be approved. Summarising, I think there are two issues which have been set by the officers. One is to do with the building line, and the other is to do with the flat roofs, particularly on the gable. Dealing with the first, and I've heard listening to the other applications today, communication is the key. I've done a lot of that with the neighbours, and they've had a lot of concerns with the site, so I've dealt with that as best I could. Concerns of height, loss of natural light, because it used to be big trees down the boundary, and being overlooked. My scheme is entirely single story to avoid any of that. And furthermore, it's already hidden well on Brent Street by 10-metre high trees. Tomorrow I have 80 laurel bushes at 1.5 metres being planted along that road boundary. And within a year and a half, you won't see any of the development I'm proposing. It'll be low key. And that was the intention, to replicate, not to replicate what's there, is to respect it and to do something around it which doesn't take away from what you see, or keep the views or the openness as you go up the street. With regard to the building line, I find this really hard to understand, because if you walk from the junction of the A38 and Brent Street all the way up and then through Burton Road towards Middle Lane, there are 15 properties that already have double garages in front of the main line of their houses, and all but two, those garages are even in front of the line of the adjacent properties either side. So I'm not asking for anything special, I'm just looking for consistency. I need a double garage because the existing garage, as a result of several years, the houses opposite have removed their gardens to create parking, which is fine. But the two occasions I've tried to get access to those garages, I've asked them to move their vehicles. That's not sustainable for me or for them. And so that's why I need to put garages in the front. I'm hoping that what you've heard and what you've read show that I'm trying to do a really good design for the neighbours and to move into the village. I hope this is acceptable to you as a committee.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Councillor Slocum and Councillor Grant, but before, and Councillor Henry, can I just ask Mr. Newman, is there anything you wish to respond to at all before I go in or take councillors'
No, I think,
questions or comments?
unless there's any questions from around the table, no.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Slocum.
Thank you, Chairman. I fully respect Mr. Newman's and what he's saying. He's a professional. He knows what he's talking about. But I do think in this instance, when somebody can communicate with neighbours and actually find a better way around something, then I think that he's done all he can, and I think that's a key when you can talk to neighbours and try to make design. So but I do respect what Mr. Newman was saying, and I fully understand why he said what he said. But I would like to move the recommendation, please, to grant permission. Sorry, to move the recommendation to grant permission, not to refuse, to grant.
So we need a planning reason why you are making that recommendation.
Okay, planning reason. The planning reason, very important, the planning reason. I think that the design, to me, I think it does meet the needs. I think the design brief does meet the needs. I think this planning application does not impose on any other neighbours, surrounds. So I think that's vitally important. And the fact that there is going to be bunding, hedgerows around, so that there's no visual impact on other neighbours. So no visual impact on neighbours. The design brief is great. And it won't, I don't believe, with all that around, it won't affect the street scene. So I'm fully satisfied. Are you satisfied, Madam Chair?
Thank you. Just check that officers are.
Absolutely, I think it's the reverse of the recommendation.
Yeah, sorry. And that was off my head, so that's to stop your flow. Councillor Grimes.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I think the same. As was said, this is a unique property. I don't think the flat roof is intrusive to any other properties. I don't see a problem with this at all. As it turns out, it's a matter of opinion on the design, and I'm more than happy to second the recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Hendry.
It's a hard act to follow.
What about me?
I concur with everything's been said there. There's not much more you can say. I heard the applicant speak, and I read what he sent out to all the council, I presume everybody else holdings. And he does have a really good case to turn this down. I'm not quite sure why, because what he explained himself about the planting of new trees, the ones that are already there, the adjacent properties with the garages that are out of line with the houses, it makes this not unique in that. It just falls in line with everybody else, I think. And it's a single story. It's not overshadowing, overlooking anybody. Yes, the footprint's bigger, but you expect that with an extension anyway. So on the back of all that, I totally agree with my two colleagues here to my right. Thank you, Chair.
You and Councillor Bolt.
One for Mr. Noon, really, or somebody whoever's pushing the buttons. Can we go back to the photo, though, which is taken opposite church, whatever it is, there's a photo, that's it. What I'm looking at there, if it's single story, it's going to be virtually impossible to see it through that by the time there's the additional screening in. And I can only concur with what everybody else has said here. It's I am aware of the road up through from the A38. Yes, there are several garages well in front of the building line.
Thank you. So we have no other speakers. We've got a proposer and a seconder.
Sorry, Madam Chairman. Because there's an overturn of an officer recommendation, the actual decision has to be delegated in terms of the appropriate conditions to be added onto this particular application. So if members are happy that the appropriate conditions can be agreed between the officer and the chair and vice chair, then we'll move on that basis. So we could just double check those who've moved and seconded if you're happy for that to be done.
And Mr. Noon.
Pretty much exactly the same point. Conditions, I think, fairly straightforward. The usual time limit, a condition to list the plans. The archaeologist has suggested a condition on page 85. You need to put that on. And I think that the a condition just to ensure that the landscaping as shown on the drawings we've seen is done. So, just to secure the benefits that the gentleman's referred to.
Okay, so the proposal is based on the fact that it's considered that the visual impact is visually appropriate to the dwelling and the wider community. Okay, all those in favour, please show. That is unanimous. That is passed unanimously. Thank you, members. That's the permission is granted. That brings us to the end of the applications, but we do have the reports to go through. Officers, we need to go through.
Mine has got it on there. To be honest, mine has got it on there.
Oh, we need to cut off.
Thank you. So this just takes us to agenda item 8 on page 89. So this just lists out the planning appeals received. So we've received an appeal for residential development of 5 dwellings, land south of 229A Berry Road. A dwelling with parking and garden areas at 80 Sydenham Road. Erection of a dwelling land west of Swall Road in Highbridge.
Any comments? No? We'll move on to the next report then.
So appeals decided. We've got a detached dwelling on site of existing garden, which was refused planning permission at 42 Moorland Road in Bridgewater. It was dismissed at appeals, so the inspector agreed with us. There was installation of an internally illuminated digital poster at 6 Church Street, which we refused, and again was supported by the inspector. We dealt with a prior approval for change of use to an agricultural building to a dwelling. We refused that one, but that one was actually allowed by the planning inspector. So that's one of the appeal decisions we tend to reflect back on when we have Class Q applications, and sometimes where you get the odd barn conversion applications through committee that look a little bit curious that have a fallback. It's because we're getting inspectors' decisions going against us on those ones. And one, not that I'm making the point, for 26 dwellings, at land east of Back Lane, Middlesoy. This was one that went to planning committee. It was recommended by officers for approval. It was deferred for a site visit. Members went out on site and decided that it should be refused on highway grounds. We have lost the appeal on that, so it was allowed on appeal. The inspector also considered that we were unreasonable in our decision, so they have also applied for costs. We're currently in the process of negotiating that because they tend to give us a really, really big invoice first, and then we negotiate the price that we think is reasonable for defending the appeal. But we have been told by the inspector we are paying costs. We're just in the process of negotiating what the actual costs are.
Thank you, Dawn. Councillor Bradford.
Could I just ask what those, is it, if it's private, sorry, Madam Chair, if it's private, I accept that. I think we should know the cost involved, what the first lot were asked for and what you're negotiating for.
I think I'll be able to update members on that once we've got a figure. At the moment, it's still a live discussion, so there is ongoing conversation between Adrian and Steve Hellard about agreeing that figure. So once it's agreed, I'll be able to give members an update on that respect.
I think people should know because
Yeah.
because the councils, but when they do these, and the council's short of money, somebody's got to pay that much money. And I have heard some of these. I just think for sense, the next 12, 15, 18 months, people will know exactly what goes on. They've got to think very hard about things when they decide to make these decisions sometimes.
Thank you, Councillor Bradford. Councillor Filmer.
We'll agree to some point with Councillor Bradford, but I think we also shouldn't be cowed into making decisions because we're frightened that someone might come after us for costs. It may well be a different inspector would have taken a different view on us, we don't know. And I don't know whether we ever will do site visits again in terms of study tours. But once and if this thing gets built out, I would very much appreciate doing a study tour there because what was proposed for the highways was dreadful. And let's wait and watch the accident record. And unfortunately, I think the ward councillor is on the committee and he will, I'm sure, keep us updated as to what happens.
Thank you for that.
Okay, forward. The next report is section 106 agreements. Just for information, this is being reported here currently, but the intention is to report section 106 agreements through to the strategic committee in the long run as part of performance measures. So this will be the last time you'll probably see this report, but it's just to confirm that we've concluded a section 106 agreement for conversion of a barn to a dwelling. So that would have been just to tie in the use of it. And then certificate of lawfulnesses, we've granted some existing uses. So certificate of lawfulness for existing agricultural buildings A and B at St Michael's to the north of Cheddar Road was granted, and application for a lawful development certificate for an existing use without the occupancy restriction at Middlemore Farm. So effectively they breached an occupancy condition in excess of 10 years and demonstrated it. And then we've got some proposed uses that we've also granted.
Can I just query that?
Yeah.
It says refuse planning permission on this one, so.
Sorry. Probably me
Did
trying
they
to
get away with it or?
quickly. No, we did refuse it, so they didn't demonstrate it properly. Apologies. I think there was a crossover of the background consents actually, so it was whether they'd implemented one consent or not, so refused. Sorry. And then for proposed lawful development certificates, there was a change of use to a 5-person HMO, which was granted permission, 121 Bristol Road. A withdrawn lawful development certificate for a stable building, a granted certificate of lawfulness for a construction of a rear dormer at Cranley Gardens, and a certificate of lawfulness for the proposed removal of existing hut and erection of a sunroom, 4x6 at Ocean Drive, Warren Road and Breen. Granted planning permission. It's quite a few of these, bear with me. We also granted consent for the siting of an incidental caravan on the garden of a hard standing for Brook Cottage in Quab Lane. We refused a proposed certificate for building an extension to an existing living space of a seasonal building, which has a really confusing description, but it was refused planning permission, and granted consent for a rear extension at 14 Marin Close. We also granted consent for construction of a hard standing extension to a property in Charleston Road, Burnham. And finally, we've granted consent for proposed use of property for a children's home to provide care for 2 individuals, supported by 2 carers and a manager at 22 4 Acre Meadow. That's the end of the report.
Thank you, Dawn. That's the end of the reports and that's, oh, Councillor Slocum.
Just a quickie. Can I just say that when we talked about site visits a long time ago, I can't remember, back in Doomsday Book, wasn't it? I just was going to say that I think the drone idea that you do, when I've seen, I think is so good, so excellent. I think the way that that brings the level down, that I think in these times of trying to go out and look and meet up with people that often don't say they're going to meet up and then they don't. I just think that is a very, very worthwhile. I think the drone is excellent. Just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Filmer.
Make any comments about droning, but I'm fully put together.
Can you say a word?
Sorry. The question is actually for you, Chair. Obviously, delegation scheme we have relies a lot on the parish council and the town councils. Historically, we've done training for them. I know we're under pressure at the moment, but are there any plans for elements of training for parishes? Because they are key to our delegation scheme and we just need to make sure they know what they're doing as well.
Yeah, I have also mentioned the same thing. And it's been taken on board, but it is because things have been difficult up till now, but it's certainly on the agenda. I don't know if officers want to say anything about potential training for parishes.
Challenging times. There has been lots of requests for training for councillors and parish and town councils as well. Councillors have been taking precedent over town and parish councils because they are the determining bodies on all the committees. We're still working through the councillor training at the moment, but they are on our radar and they are an ambition at some point, but capacity is limited at the moment.
Thank you. If there are no other comments, that brings us to the end of the meeting. So I thank members for attending.